Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku had Lady Luck by his side? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Katsuki frowned as he saw Nanami filling out a form with her less dominant hand while looking at her hand beneath the desk. She would wave it away and tease him instead, asking if he cared, which was annoying. Which he didn't. He heard her start to hum, and his irritation subsided. It was loud enough for him to hear, but since no other students seemed to mind, it was probably because she was seated next to him. His foul mood subsided slightly as he closed his eyes to listen. He opened his eyes once more and looked down to see her hand hidden beneath the desk. Okay. Perhaps I do care a little. His eyes widened at his line of reasoning, and he began to growl incredulously. Reaching out, he gave her long fringe of hair a sharp tug, asking, "Nana, will you shut the fuck up already?" She yelled. Ow. She punched his arm after turning. You're such a prick, Katsuki. To get her to stop calling him Pommy, he had to wager on games a lot. It felt good to hear his name. He flicked her forehead and grinned. The formality pleased him. Damn right. Change POV as she completed a request form for the sports festival, Nanami sighed. She started depending more on her left hand after realizing that the smoke only ever came from her dominant hand. Her handwriting had gotten better, she acknowledged. She massaged her aching scalp. It was Katsuki's habit to pull at her fringe. She suspected that he was attempting to prevent her from doing so herself. She grinned slightly and got up to hand the paper into Midnight in the faculty room. There, that should do it, she said. Aizawa nodded consentingly as she showed him the paper. She heard Ashido call, "Hey, Nanami-chan, is that an item request form?" Nanami raised the paper to cover half of her face shyly as she looked at it. Yeah, I want to use my slingshot and bouncy balls for the festival. Aoyama-kun told me he filled one out for his belt, so I figured it was alright, she spoke quietly. If possible, I want to rely on my quirk as little as possible. Nanami recoiled as the pink girl gave her a gentle shoulder shake. What? You aren't going to use your quirk? She said. Ashido insisted, that's no good. You're supposed to show your quirk off. She waved Izuku over while averting her gaze. Hey Midoriya, come here and tell her. If she doesn't use her quirk, the pros won't notice her. Startled to be thrown into the conversation, Izuku leapt. Unsure of what to say, he looked at Nanami. Nanami looked back at him, her lips pursed. Pulling her hair and averting her gaze, she approached Aizawa and presented her application without uttering a word. As he watched her walk out of the room, Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and scowled. Ashido scowled. She said, I'm sorry, did I miss something? Aren't you guys super close? Izuku glanced at his desk while biting his lip. I mean, I'm just waiting for her to talk to me at this point, he murmured. I kind of upset her a little while ago. Uraraka questioned, so you were fighting with Yoshino-chan? She started waving her arms wildly before focusing on the boy with the curly hair. Deku-kun, you should apologize to her. It's heartbreaking to watch you two fight, she cried, wearing a tiny pout. Izuku turned red and leaned away, looking away. It's kind of a difficult situation. I can't do anything until she talks with me, so he hid his face. Oh, so it is Midoriya-kun, the group exclaimed as they turned to face Hagakure, who appeared to have an epiphany while holding her hand on her chin. Then she became aware that she was being looked at and dismissively waved her arm. Oh no, don't mind me. Nanami walked down the hall with her fist clenched. She sighed as she gazed at the cloud of bad luck that whirled around her hand. In an attempt to dispel the smoke like water, she shook her hand. When it had finally disappeared, she grinned. She struck a solid chest just as she had arrived at her destination. She held her nose and staggered back. She looked up and blinked at her victim's wide smile, saying, OWW, you sorry. She studied his features. A bright smile, blonde hair, and pleasant blue eyes. For some reason, Nanami felt compelled to cover her eyes. It resembled gazing at the sun. The happy boy said, Wow, are you okay? Sorry I didn't see you there, you're just so itty-bitty. He cracked a joke. Nanami's nose wrinkled up. He laughed sheepishly, realizing that his joke had failed. He took her left hand and gave it a wild shake, saying, Sorry, I hope that didn't offend you. I'm Tagata Mirio, 3rd year. As soon as he took her hand, Nanami stiffened. She had been at a loss for words because of his directness. People who were honest, direct, and positive frightened her the most. Perhaps because of Katsuki's mother. Only constant exposure had accustomed her to Ashido. Looking over Tagata's shoulder, she saw someone even more menacing come out of the faculty room. "Mirio, I think, you're making her uncomfortable," he grumbled. His eyes were narrow and frightening, and his hair was dark blue. When Tagada said, "What? Really? You should have said something, Miss Bunny," she instantly let go of her hand. There had been only a slight lapse in his smile. Nanami scowled. She thought incredulously, "It seems like people really like comparing me to rabbits these days." She looked at the boy next to him and found herself staring down at his intense glare, but she couldn't tell if he was making fun of her or not. She cleared her throat softly, "I'm afraid," pointing behind them with a trembling finger. "I need to, get through." Was she regressing? Shoot? She was certain that she had overcome her shyness because she had felt so at ease in class. She was being proven wrong by this haphazard and far too drawn-out exchange. By saying, "Oh, wait, first," Tagada started. In case her quirk started acting up, Nanami concealed her right hand behind her back. He shoved his friend forward, saying, "Introduce yourselves. Gotta get the friendship train back on track," instead. Suddenly, Nanami found herself facing the more formidable of the two. His eyes narrowed on her, and she shuffled uneasily in her shoes. She paused, trying to suppress nervous tears as her eyes stung. She became aware that her upperclassman was shaking at that moment. When he finally turned to face the wall, his entire body, including his mouth and eyes, was trembling. Nanami's shoulders slumped with comprehension. She was shy, but this boy was even more so. To get rid of the smoke, she shook her hand behind her back. She pigeoned her toes as she looked at the two boys and considered her options. She started to tug on her fringe, then stopped to look at the bashful boy. She said. She folded her hands in front of her and closed her eyes. Nanami bowed respectfully, straightening her back and bringing her legs together. "My name is Yoshino Nanami. I'm in my first year." "Whoa, so formal," she exclaimed, fighting the urge to flush as Tagada cheered. "Come on now, you gotta say something after that." The boy turned and looked at her, his trembling intensifying. He managed to whisper, "Amajiki Tamaki, third year." Nanami gave a nod. She pointed past them, trying to keep her eyes on them. May I get through, please?" "Oh. Right," cried Tagada. He took an exaggerated step to the side and bowed, his hand outstretched. "Our apologies, Miss Bunny." Nanami's gaze wavered. She moved between them, her gaze straying to Amajiki, "And I thought I might have just told them my name." As the two boys started to walk away, she paused to gaze. The sight of his ears caused her head to tilt. "Like the ears of an elf," pointed. "His ears are cute, I kinda wanna touch them." Her eyes grew wide as his shoulders stiffened and he put both hands over his ears, continuing to walk without stopping. When Nanami realized she had spoken aloud, her eyes grew wide. In the hopes of never seeing them again, she dashed into the faculty room. After school ended for the day, Nanami was worn out. To improve the class's hand-to-hand combat skills, Aizawa led a sparring session. Despite being violent and surprisingly enjoyable, the lesson was exhausting and left her feeling sore. Yayorozu, her opponent, had reportedly little prior experience in the field. When two different arms looped around hers, she yelled. She turned to see that she was being held captive by Kyoka and Toru. "You're stalling, Nanami-chan," reprimanded the figureless girl. Nervously, the blonde said, "Stalling?" Kyoka laughed. "You know," she reprimanded him. Nanami was swiftly dragged to the side and out of sight by the two girls. The words, "Your Midoriya confession," caused Nanami's face to flush. "We can help you know. Kyoka-chan has been feeling super guilty about how you and Midoriya-kun have been. Plus, he literally said that he's waiting for you to speak to him," Toru persisted. "Nanami-chan, you can't keep going like this. It's for your own good that we did what we did." Nanami furrowed her brows. With suspicion, she inquired, Did what?" "We may have given him a note that said you wanted to see him after school by the confession tree," Kyoka acknowledged. "You did what?" she exclaimed. As her friends started pushing her in the direction of the back of the school, she started digging her heels into the ground. Clearly overpowered by the two girls, she begged, Wait, I'm not ready. Please, I can't do this yet." "Nanami, you keep saying that. A girl is never ready but," Kyoka moaned, taken aback by the little girl's level of resistance. "He's waiting for you. If you don't do it now, you never will. It's better to get it over with. This is for Midoriya-kun too. He's been so worried." Toru gasped. The girl's resistance subsided, and she let out a sigh of relief. As the three girls got closer, they noticed Izuku standing by a big tree at the rear of the school. He appeared interested in a bird chirping on the fence, with his back to them. Kyoka and Toru shoved her hard, and Nanami could hear her heart pounding in her ears. After a few seconds, she tried to turn around and walk away, but Kyoka pointed menacingly in Izuku's direction while Toru had her hands on her hips. With a groan, Nanami turned back to face her crush. She inspected her hand, inhaled deeply, and patted her chest. She gave herself a nod and started walking slowly in Izuku's direction. He kept his back to her as if he didn't notice her. Before she turned to face the girls again, she was only a few feet away from him. After giving her the thumbs up, they hurried away to give themselves some privacy. She took a breath. Izuku. Izuku turned to face her, his shoulders stiffening. She pleaded pathetically, Please no, don't turn around until I've said it. I'll lose my nerve, he nodded, and she watched. It was a simple, okay, take your time, phrase. Shutting her eyes, Nanami started. We've been friends for a bit now, and I've always thought you were amazing. Even when you didn't have a quirk, why you chased your dream, when I felt down or thought about how I wanted to give up, I would think about you. Her cheeks were starting to burn. I always find myself wishing I was like you. Able to go forward and go for what I want, or to do the right thing without thinking, and. In case her quirk acted up, she shook her hands, when she heard, Nanami. Nanami took a bite out of her cheek. She approached Izuku and took both of his hands, her head lowered as she mustered the bravery to do so. He gave her a comforting squeeze. She whispered, You know what I'm trying to say, right? He said softly, I do. But if you don't tell me, I can't answer you. Nanami looked at his back when she opened her eyes. They grew softer, and she gave his hand a firm squeeze. She took her time, and he said nothing. He squeezed her hand again, and she was certain he could feel the pounding in her heart. She opened her mouth and straightened her back. To his ears, she whispered, Midoriya Izuku, I, Yoshino Nanami, like you. Maybe even love you, and I wasn't going to tell you, because I'm unlucky. I don't deserve to have a boyfriend for all the trouble I would cause him. I was going to support you and the girl you actually end up liking. She chewed on her cheek. But I still had the nerve to like you. I like you so much it almost hurts. Will you, Midoriya Izuku, accept my feelings? Even though she knew the answer, she felt it still needed to be heard. Izuku spun around, his cheeks pink and his eyes gentle. He squeezed her hand once more and met her gaze. Change POV. Izuku was standing nervously at the big tree in the courtyard's far corner. He was aware of the impending event. He was about to hear what Nanami was going to tell him. He needed to hear it from her, but he had his answer. Nanami was extremely valuable to him and had been his first friend in years. She was brought closer to him, and he could hear her arguing with someone. He glanced at a bird that had taken up residence on the fence a short distance from him. Nanami was the first to repeatedly defend him against Kacchan. The first girl to cry over him was Nanami. The first girl to like him was Nanami. His heart started beating rapidly. She was fond of him. He had been attempting to comprehend his emotions ever since he learned of the fact. However, he erred by ignoring her. That day, she had left during lunch and returned with Hagakure. He had witnessed her red eyes and how, despite her best efforts to conceal it with makeup, she had been crying. As soon as they looked at each other, he could see she was trying not to cry. How he brought her to tears. The tears she seemed to shed over him all the time. Izuku, behind him, he could hear her quiet, frightened voice. He would soon turn around. Please no, don't turn around until I've said it. I'll lose my nerve. When he heard her, his heart twisted. All he could manage to say was, okay, take your time. He listened to her express her emotions. Izuku could feel his face getting warmer and his blush extending to his ears. She was very genuine. She was always full of praise for him, but this was different. She was a very kind individual. He felt an overwhelming need to love and protect this precious person. He felt her small hands clasp one of his and heard her footsteps. He squeezed her hand as he sensed her trembling. You know what I'm trying to say, right? He gazed at his red shoes, and his eyes grew softer. He was aware. He said softly, I do. But if you don't tell me, I can't answer you. As he squeezed her hand, he could feel her heartbeat quicken. As she went on, he could almost feel the little girl bracing herself. He shut his eyes. To his ears, she whispered, Midoriya Izuku, I, Yoshino Nanami, like you. Maybe I even love you, and I wasn't going to tell you, because I'm unlucky. I don't deserve to have a boyfriend for all the trouble I would cause him. I was going to support you and the girl you actually end up liking. Izuku's eyes widened as he listened. But I still had the nerve to like you. I like you so much it almost hurts. Will you, Midoriya Izuku, accept my feelings? Hearing her criticize herself in such a way while confessing was painful. But when he heard her say it, his heart had felt lighter. He desired to feel the same way she did. He desired her happiness. He saw their happiness together. He was pleased to hear her confess. He covered his heart with his hand. But Izuku turned around and met her gaze, his face an unmistakable shade of red. He released her hand while observing her brown doe eyes welling up. Nanami, you're my best friend. I like you a lot and I could see us being happy together, but, he said. You're so amazing, Nanami, and I don't want you to hate me. But, I'm sorry. I can't return your feelings, my heart just doesn't feel the same way, you're like a little sister to me. It wouldn't feel right, he said quietly. Nanami remained silent. His heart twisted as he gazed into her eyes and saw the anguish concealed there. With a bright smile on her face, she closed her eyes and placed her hands behind his back. He saw her shoulders tremble as she looked down and said, I could never hate you, you're my precious friend. Weakly, she said, you're still my friend, right? Izuku instantly nodded. With a slight smile, he extended his hand to give her a head pat. Yes, of course. She gave him a hug as her eyes glowed. Thank goodness. Izuku wrapped an arm around her shoulders for the first time. He was glad that this wouldn't ruin their friendship. Her gentle kiss on his cheek caused him to flush. He looked at her in disbelief as he released her and touched his cheek. She turned around with a gentle smile and said, Sorry, I won't do that again. I'll see you later, okay? My parents tend to get worried if I get home late. Izuku leapt. I can walk you home if you'd like. And no, it's okay. The crack of her voice made him wince. She didn't say anything more before leaving. Guilt weighed heavily on his heart. She was clearly trying to maintain her composure in front of him. He knew it was the right thing to do, even though it hurt that he had hurt her. Change POV. As soon as she was out of sight, Nanami ran. Toru and Kyoka were both prepared to console her as she rushed past them. She ran past Katsuki instead of apologizing after bumping into him, which caused the fiery blonde to yell indignantly. The rejection was far more painful than she had anticipated. She repeatedly experienced rejection from strangers, by possible companions. All she wanted to do was run. She ignored any black cats she saw, ran beneath ladders, and stepped on cracks. She had texted her mother to let her know that she had been invited to stay at a friend's house and had been given permission. She wasn't with friends, though. She wasn't going to a friend's house, and she was by herself. Running through the woods that Todoroki had shown her, she gasped for air. She continued to run, but the boy was nowhere to be seen. She collapsed in the middle of the woods, her lungs burning. She hugged her knees and leaned against a tree, her legs weak. The purple smoke encircled her ruthlessly, and she was tired. She had run for this reason. She lied for this reason. She chuckled at the irony of Izuku's near-attack experience. When Izuku was around, her quirk would always act out. She would simply become very emotional. The thought of Izuku made her heart tighten. She was not ready to cry yet. She simply concealed her head between her knees instead. Hey, Nana. What the fuck was that about? Katsuki's voice made Nanami wince. Quietly, she said, Go away. You can't be here. She had led someone here after Todoroki gave her his secret location. Why are you here? You fucking bumped into me and didn't even. Katsuki halted when he saw that the girl had shunned him. Are you crying again? Why are you always crying? You're as bad as the Shidnerd. He cracked a joke. Normally, he would get a glare for it, and the silence made him uneasy. I'm not crying. There's no reason to. But, Katsuki, I want to be alone. Please, can you do as I ask just this once? Katsuki rubbed his hand through his hair and scowled. When Nanami didn't respond, he stepped closer to her and asked, Is this about that shitty Deku? What's with that smoke? Don't come closer, my quirk is spilling out. So just don't touch it, go away, this is why I ran. He ignored the smoke and sat down beside her, saying, You shouldn't be out here alone, you're going to get kidnapped. This looks like the kind of place a fucking creeper or murderer would hang out. What the fuck happened? You better tell me right now. You're pissing me off. Furious. I got rejected, okay? She yelled, and I told you not to touch the smoke. Katsuki stiffened at the strange subject. Rejected? Like, a love confession? Irritated, Nanami disregarded her cautions. It wasn't her favorite thing about him. She sighed and decided that since she knew he wouldn't go, it would be best to tell him. He was responsible for any misfortune he caught, which was certain to be severe. She gave a nod. So you Nanami gave him a quick look. For once, it appeared that he was truly at a loss for words. He growled, fucking goddammit, if I had known it was this I would have left you alone. This is so stupid. She probably would have laughed if she hadn't been in such a foul mood. In annoyance, his hands exploded in tiny bursts. When Nanami put her head on her knees and turned her back on him, he stiffened. I'm sorry, my feelings are so stupid. You know what this is about now, so you can leave. She grumbled bitterly. All she wanted to do was wallowing in her emotions, but she wasn't even getting the opportunity. He growled and stood up angrily, saying, no, that's not what. Fucking hell, Freckles. He moaned as he moved in circles and then detonated a dead tree a short distance away. As he stomped out the flames that instantly burst out as soon as it hit the ground, Nanami watched. With a sigh, he combed through his hair. Her lack of response made him frown. Alright, I'm gonna try again. And if you get all fucking smart, I'll do you to your hair what I did to that tree. He massaged his temples and took a seat next to her once more. He stretched the word out in disgust, saying, I'm not good at shit like this. I don't comfort. It's gross. Alright, so you confessed to Deku. I didn't say. He scoffed and muttered the last part so she wouldn't hear it. I'm not fucking stupid. Anyone could see that you liked that nerd. Who knows why when you got me. Nanami looked down, her cheeks burning. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, the shit nerd rejected you. Now you're here being upset. He glanced at her and said, fuck, what do I say to this? He rubbed his neck nervously and said, look, Deku may be a fucking nuisance, and I know you like him, but you're better off without him. He was sweating and was losing patience. How'd I say this? He asked, running his hand through his hair to avoid any explosions. He glanced at his fellow blonde and said, that nerd only has being a hero in mind. He wouldn't give you much time, and he probably fucking knows that. It's fine if you get upset, but don't let something so dumb as getting rejected bring you so low. Nanami felt the urge to weep. She was aware that he was being honest. She was unable to cry in front of him, even though she wanted to do so until the pain subsided. You're really weird. You cry all the damn time but now you're holding back? He inquired. He pressed her face against his chest and placed his hand on the back of her head. Go ahead and do it. There's no one else here and I won't say anything until you're done. I'm not good with words, so this is probably the best your sorry ass is gonna get. His chest smothered Nanami, and her eyes grew wide. The smell of a fireplace softened her expression. Her eyes started to well up once more. Your uniform will get wet, let it. She tried not to cry when the first tear fell, but eventually the dam broke and she started crying. She felt Katsuki stroke her hair as she put her arms around him. Despite his obvious discomfort, she knew he was trying his hardest to remain patient. She didn't notice that her smoke didn't touch him, but she was relieved that he didn't flinch as it circled around them. He was still stroking her hair when she heard him sigh. Nanami cried into the night, sincerely appreciating it. There was nothing Katsuki could do. He had no intention of allowing Nana to camp in the woods, even though she had every intention of doing so. It was annoying because she had put her arms around the closest tree and wouldn't let go, so he had to literally pull her off of it. Like a bag of potatoes, he had carried her to his home. His mother was out with a friend at the time, and his father was still working, so his house was empty. Presently, she was seated in the center of his room. Her strange smoke had thinned to a barely perceptible mist, and her eyes were puffy from crying. At her request, Katsuki took a spoon out of the freezer and growled in frustration. He stared at the spoon confusedly, wondering what she would do with them. I'm going to fucking kill Deku. All this fucking nonsense, he said. She has friends, right? Maybe I'll take her phone and call one to pick her up, he murmured. With a heavy sigh, he went upstairs. He opened it and took a quick look inside. She had somehow made her way onto his bed, where she was cradling a pillow and in the fetal position. To tell the truth, the sight made him angry. Give me your phone. I'm gonna text one of the extras to get you because you're not staying here. He insisted. She exchanged the phone for his cold spoon without a word. Although it was an older smartphone model, it was still superior to her flip phone. She pressed the spoon to her eye, and he watched in disbelief. The fuck? Is that some girl face hack or something? Nana simply nodded in response, without saying anything. She merely shrugged when asked, who should I text? His head developed an irk mark. He had never wanted to blow up the girl so badly as he did now. I swear to God, if you don't say something, I'll take a picture of your puffy face and send it to everyone and show you each text of them freaking out. That caused her to respond. Good Lord, why must you always resort to violence or torture? She gasped. She sat up, still holding his pillow. Don't call anyone. I don't want anyone to see me like this. Let me stay the night in the woods and all my problems will be solved. She was insistent. As though to support her request, she was pointing one finger up into the air. Furiously, Katsuki combed through her contacts. She gave some of her friends strange nicknames. He chose the one named Sobahiro after scrolling through. He laughed at the moniker. He paused and thought about how the girl wanted as few people to see her as possible before saying, "I have her. Come to this address if you want her. Come alone." He was irritated by the lack of response when he texted his address. With a shrug, he rose above her. She gave him a disinterested glance. With a hint of annoyance, he questioned, "What's so great about Deku anyway?" He blushed at his own insinuation. "Honestly, I don't get why anyone would choose that shitnerd when I'm here." He muttered, "Not that I'm saying I like you. Just that it makes more sense for you to like me." In response, he saw her frown and her eyes soften. She whispered, "Izukun is the sweetest boy I've ever met." She pressed his pillow closer to her chest in an embrace. As she continued, Katsuki found himself becoming increasingly agitated. "His eyes just tell me that everything is all right, and I always feel like he'd keep me safe. But he still respects me. But what I love most about him is his smile. That warm smile that could light up a room. Every time I saw it, I could feel myself falling for him harder." "If that's how you feel, you must be pissed that he rejected you, huh?" With her eyes closed and slightly swollen, she grinned broadly and looked up at him. "No, I'm fine with this outcome. Getting angry won't solve my problems." The sound of tiny explosions made her body tense. "I'm happy to just continue loving him, even if it's unrequited. It's better for everyone that I stay single anyway." When she opened her eyes, she noticed that Katsuki's hands were illuminating wildly. What are you so angry for?" Without a word, Katsuki took her hand and pulled her to his backyard. He didn't let go until they had made contact with the grass, ignoring her desperate questions. "How can you say you still love that bastard? He broke your heart. You should be pissed at him," he yelled furiously. There were larger explosions from his hands. "You're mad, right? You're mad at him?" He saw Nana go into a defensive position. "I'm not mad at him. Why would I be? I'm sad he doesn't feel the same way, but that's no reason to be angry. He likes someone else. I knew that, and I had the nerve to like him. It's not like he did something wrong, right?" Katsuki listened to her talk, his cheeks burning. He ran toward her, aiming a weak but undoubtedly painful explosion at her chest. "He liked someone else? So fucking what? You liked him? You should have tried to take him back then," he exclaimed. "You never think about yourself. People like you piss me off the most." Nana leapt out of the way, her eyes widening. She had to deflect his impending fist and move away from him. "What are you doing? We shouldn't fight each other. I'm telling you, I'm fine," she exclaimed. "And I'm telling you that you aren't. There's no way you're fine," he yelled. "I can see it. You have all these pent-up emotions and you're just trying to be the better man and let it go." He pushed her. "To hell with that. You're fine just experiencing this unrequited bullshit. Don't lie to yourself. Get mad and fight me." He grinned at the rebellious expression in her eye as she staggered back. He was aware that she needed this. Despite his lack of comforting skills, he was not a moron. He was going to make her vent all of her repressed anger on him. If not, it would contaminate her and fester inside of her. But it was more than this. How much anger was that little frame clinging to? It didn't take a genius to figure out that her unfortunate quirk made life difficult for her. There would be incidents where she was injured or inconvenienced, or she would be teased. He observed that she would constantly bite her tongue or, even more annoyingly, tug on her hair. She never lost her temper with those who would start such things. If he had to be the appropriate outlet for her, then so be it. He seemed to be the only person she could be angry with, and she was much weaker than him. He was able to handle it. He might as well assist her with his assholery skills. He pushed her as a result. Weak explosions repeatedly hit her sides, preventing her from ever resting. She never did, however, strike back. She would push his arm away or avoid it. However, it is evident from the faint burn marks on her uniform that she was occasionally struck. He pinned her to a tree with one hand next to her head and the other smoking menacingly near her fringe after determining it was time to use the nuclear option. He smirked at her clenching fist and saw her doe eyes darken. The expression was new. Examining her face, he discovered that he didn't dislike the way she bit her lip in an attempt to control her anger. Her angry face appealed to him. She appeared to be afraid of something at all times. It was quite a pleasant change. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as his face was inches from Nana's, and said, "Do something, Nana. I fucking dare you to hit me. You're mad, right? Mad at how nothing goes your way." He chided. Their noses were now pressed together as he ventured closer. He was pleased when her cheeks dusted and watched with satisfaction as her freckled face twisted with more anger. She was going to snap. A wall of jagged ice grew behind him, forcing him to suddenly step forward and practically cover her body with his own. With a curse, he glanced to the side and was taken aback to see the scorching bastard. Get away from her. Now. Change POV. Nanami glanced nervously between the boys. How did this happen? What made Katsuki so determined that she fight him? They were friends, she believed, but this, more significantly, though, why did Todoroki appear to be prepared to freeze the ecstatic boy from the inside out? With an excessively large explosion, Katsuki destroyed the ice wall after turning to face it. If only to avoid being so awkwardly pressed against Nanami, he took the slightest step back. In her opinion, she would have preferred that he stop touching her, but whatever. Katsuki claimed to have texted one of Nanami's friends, and she remembered this and questioned whether it was related to this. He sent her something that made her cringe as she read through her messages. She moaned and put her palm to her forehead. She thought irritably, it sounds like some Rondo kidnapped me and wanted ransom. A fight between the two powerhouses could be dangerous, she realized as she glanced between the boys. It doesn't help that Katsuki has me pinned to a tree. It appears as though he's going to exploit me. Katsuki mockingly asked, what the hell is your problem half and half? Todoroki snarled, Bakugo, what are you doing to Nanami? He stalked slowly toward them, twitching his right hand as he approached. Observing the puff in her face, he demanded, did you make her cry? Katsuki grinned. He sneered, so what if I did? He had remained in their precarious position. That's not why you're here now, is it? You can wait, we were getting to the good part. At this statement, Nanami started to perspire profusely. Was he unaware of what this looked like? Todoroki turned to face her, his eyes darkening. Nanami, he said, extending his hand to her, come. She gave Katsuki a nervous glance before slipping away and rushing to her worried classmate. She blushed and closed her eyes. Todoroki-kun, it's a misunderstanding. He didn't, she said. He didn't take advantage of me or anything. In that message, he was just asking you to come get me. He was just really stupid about it. Katsuki interrupted, who the hell are you callin'? As Nanami threw her phone in his face. With a frown, he picked it up from the floor and looked at the messages he had sent. He paused and pursed his lips before reading his messages again. His eyes narrowed in comprehension. Oh. Angry at his error, he threw the phone back at her and turned away. She can't sleep at my house, so I just need someone to take her. It's not my fault that you misinterpreted me, icy hot bastard. As he examined Nanami, Todoroki silently took her hand and said, you've been crying. He looked at Katsuki with suspicion. It wasn't me, it was that sulky Deku, he gave a fierce bark. After raising an eyebrow, Todoroki turned to face Nanami and squeezed her hand, saying, if you'd like, you can sleep at my house. After a moment of reflection, Nanami nodded in agreement and turned to face Katsuki. Thanks for taking care of her, Bakugo. The two then departed, leaving Bakugo to his own thoughts. It's big so no one will really notice you if you're quiet. He thought irritably, why does it feel like I'm a father giving the bride away? You cried because of Midoriya? Todoroki posed a direct question. Yes, in theory. No, Todoroki-kun, I don't want to talk about it. Nanami was in the bathroom, getting dressed in the clothes he had given her, and he was watching the door to make sure nobody was trying to enter. Is it related to the way he turned you down after school? Something fell, and he heard it. Are you okay? How are you aware of that? Pulling herself up after falling out of shock, she asked. Mineta saw it and felt the need to talk about it rather loudly for some reason. Nanami sighed and left the bathroom, remembering to kick the little pervert where it hurt the next time she saw him. Todoroki looked at her and saw that she was dressed in a simple blue shirt that fit her like a nightgown and some sweatpants that he wore infrequently. He looked away, then took her hand and escorted her to his room. Looking around the excessively traditional home, Nanami enjoyed the feeling that she was in a prince's home. After taking a quick look at Todoroki, she decided that the boy did indeed look like a prince. When will you give me a call, Shoto? I call you Nanami, and you call your friends by their first names, he said haphazardly. He opened the door and followed her inside, shutting it behind them. You never said we were friends so, Nanami said, blushing and pulling at her fringe. She sat on the floor and smiled softly. Shoto, since we're friends, will you tell me more about you? Quietly, she inquired. I think I've put everything together. Your mother was the one who burned you, correct? I don't need you to tell me if I'm correct or not. Todoroki Shoto sat next to her and said, yes, my old man committed her to a mental health facility. She claimed to have detested my left side and doused my face in boiling water. Nanami tensed at the heavy bomb he had just dropped. Everything, he growled low, and Nanami winced as the room's temperature dropped. That old man is to blame for everything. If I can avoid it, I will not use his power. I will no longer allow him to rule my life. You've said that part before, Nanami said, scowling as she glanced at her feet. She put a finger to her chin and said, I'm sorry, but it doesn't make much sense to me. Unless, she said, raising an eyebrow at her. Shoto squirmed a little as she started patting him in random places, pulling his sleeve up and running her hands through his hair, as if she were examining him. What are you doing? She turned him around and lifted the back of his shirt to look at his back, explaining solemnly, checking for a device that controls you. There doesn't seem to be anything, she said. Her actions made him flush. No, there's no device or anything, he said, perplexed. But you just said he tries to control you, Nanami asked, tilting her head. She said, but if there's no device controlling you, then I think you're looking at this wrong. She looked at her hands and said, unfortunate, that's my quirk. Her cheeks turned dark red as she lowered his shirt and he tilted his head. Oh, you meant it differently, she cleared her throat. Although it's referred to as a mutation, it most likely originated from my grandmother's nightmare quirk. Even though my grandmother thinks it's awful, I'm in the hero course. She grinned up at him and said, it's my quirk to use, not hers. I decide how I use it, and I decide if it's good or bad, not her. You know, it's the same for you. Shoto's eyes grew a little wider. He glanced at his left hand and said, what, but, I got it from that bastard. He stiffened as her hands arrived on his cheeks out of the blue. He looked in her direction. And you got your eyes from your mother. Nanami frowned as she said this. But that doesn't make it any less yours, does it? Just like your fireside, it's part of you. The fact that you're not using your left side is proof. You decide whether or not you use it because it's your power. Not endeavors. Do you understand, Shoto? She said sternly. Shoto touched her with his left hand. He gazed at her, his heterochromia orbs wide. She gave him a smile, but her eyes were worried because he appeared to be doubting everything. He pulled her to him and put her arms around her, and she yelled. He was giving her a hug. With a gentle sigh, Nanami wrapped her arms around him and nuzzled him. The hug ended as fast as it had begun. He gazed at the floor while keeping her at arm's length. Thanks, I suppose that was something I needed to hear. I must have had tunnel vision. I never saw it that way. He murmured. He gave her a narrowed look. She stiffened. We still need to talk about Midoriya. She hoped that he would overlook it, but damn it. She looked at his hands, which were loosely gripping her shoulders, and said, not much to talk about. I told him I like him, and he told me I'm like a little sister. I cried in the woods and Katsuki dragged me to his house like I was a sack of potatoes. I feel okay. I feel like shit, but I'm okay. Katsuki wanted me to fight him because he's under the impression I'm filled with pent-up rage. But in general, I'm just not an angry person. Shoto winced inwardly at her profanity. He thought angrily, Bakugo is a bad influence. In contemplation, he placed a hand to his chin and released her shoulders. He started, I suppose I understand, everyone gets angry, though. Nanami gave a headshake. She had no desire to carry on this discussion. So the sports festival is coming up. Are you ready? She laughed. Once it starts, we're going to be rivals. Yeah. But I'm probably going to have to do some training, Shoto said, blinking and glancing at his hands before turning to face her and raising an eyebrow. I suppose you wouldn't mind joining me? There's a training room down the hall. I don't think either of us will be sleeping anytime soon. If you don't make much noise, my family'll probably just think it's me. Nanami nodded, grinning. Yeah, honestly, that sounds great. Nanami turned to Shoto and tied her hair up. On the other side of the room stood the boy. Your goal is for you to land a hit on me, he stated, and my goal is to get you to stop moving with my ice. Nanami gave a nod. She respected her friend's decision to hold off on using his firepower until he was ready. The question was whether she could remain so silent. Shoto threw his ice at her without warning. She launched herself into the air, tumbling and then sprinting. His ice slid like a swift glacier as she leapt to her feet. Waving her arms to keep her balance, she planted her feet firmly on the tip. Leaping forward, she executed her signature axe kick by raising her leg. Shoto slid behind her at the last second, seized her arm, and started to freeze her. With a hiss, she placed her hands behind him on his shoulders. She leapt and landed behind him, using her leverage to flip him over and knock him to the ground. Uncertain whether or not to punch him, she hesitated. The cooling sensation from his right side caused her eyes to widen. and she jumped back as ice sprang up where she was standing. Nanami felt ice on her thigh and grunted. He had done that when? Nanami knew this was her last chance, so she slowed her movements. She thought about using her quirk, but she wasn't sure how to use it for her own good. She moved slowly and let the little cloud of bad luck fall to the ground. Instead of rising as regular smoke would, it spread slowly. Despite being cautious of the cloud, Shoto charged in, ready to freeze her in a single blow. To prevent the spread of the smoke, he rode on his ice and frozen a thin layer on top of it. As Nanami's plan came apart, she bit her lip. More misfortune was what she needed. The ice broke and smoke escaped just as she was ready to strike her hands on the floor. Shoto abruptly slipped and fell onto his side, causing his eyes to widen. A few feet in front of Nanami, he slid forward and came to a stop. Seeing her opportunity, Nanami sprang forward, only to land on her face. She tried to stand up but was unable to do so. Her bare feet were frozen to the ground, and she grimaced as she turned to look behind her. Oof, she sat on her knees and rubbed her face. As Shoto walked behind her and broke the ice, she said, "I guess I lost." She chuckled a little and said, "I didn't stand a chance, did I?" "You did well. Your mobility and flexibility made you hard to hit. I wasn't expecting your smoke to spread like that." At this point, Nanami was shivering because a lot of her body was covered in frost or ice. After defrosting her with his left hand, Todoroki tensed and spun around as the training room door opened. A female voice yelled, "Shoto!" As he took her arm and dragged her behind him to conceal himself, Nanami stiffened. Calmly, he said, "Fuyumi, did you need something?" Fuyumi placed the tea on the floor and said, "Oh, I heard you training again, so I brought you some tea to keep you warm. I wish you wouldn't train so late at night. It's bad for your sleep schedule." Nanami attempted to control her shivers while grinning subtly. "A sister? She seems like a nice person." He deflected with ease, saying, "I understand. I'll go to bed after I clean up here." "Okay. I'll leave you to it then. Good night, Shoto." The door shut, and the two teenagers listened anxiously as her footsteps drew farther away. The two sighed and relaxed their posture after a few seconds. Nanami took a small step back and warmed her arms. She acknowledged, "Your sister seems quite lovely." She saw Shoto pick up the teacup and present it to her. He held the cup to her without answering, and she shuffled under his gaze, saying, Oh no, that's for you." She blew on the hot liquid and took a tiny sip, saying, "Thanks." She let out a grateful sigh as the warmth filled her entire body. To thaw the ice that covered her body, Shoto placed his left hand on her shoulder and started to transfer the heat throughout her. Leaning against his touch, she let out a sigh. As soon as she was sufficiently warm, he started to move around the room, melting and evaporating the ice until there was no more sign of the spar. Nanami followed him back to his room after taking one last sip of the tea and letting out a quiet sigh. As they stepped into the safe area, he inquired, "Do you feel better now?" She glanced at him, a little taken aback by the arbitrary inquiry. "About today, do you feel better?" Nanami's gaze expanded. "Oh, he wanted me to vent my annoyance. They don't realize how much he and Katsuki have in common." Her eyes narrowed in realization, and she smiled slightly. "Cunning man." She cleared her throat. "Yeah, I feel much better." Shoto took out his futon and hummed. He folded his arms and scowled. "Maybe I should have told Fuyumi you're here." He frowned as though it were evident, then glanced at her and gestured to the futon. "Why do you say that?" he asked. Nanami's gaze was fixed on the futon. She shook her head, saying, "Oh, there's only one." She chuckled nervously, "I don't need a futon. I'm fine on the floor," while laughing. Shoto gave a headshake. He said, "Wait here," and walked out of the room. Nanami twitched her thumbs and stood clumsily silently. Her heart pounding in her ears was the only sound she could hear. Izukun rejected me first, and that same night I'm spending the night at the house of a pretty boy. I'm not a floozy because of this, am I? Anxiously, she thought. She gave a headshake. Todoroki, Shoto, is just being a good friend, so of course not. This has no other significance. The opening of the door startled her, and a young woman with mostly white hair entered carrying a futon. "Hello there," she let out in a low voice. As Shoto entered after Nanami, she was rendered speechless. She placed it just a few inches away from Shoto's and covered it with a blanket. "I'm Fuyumi, Shoto's older sister. He filled me in on the basics, so I brought you a futon. There." She grinned as she turned to face Nanami. "You're in the hero course, right?" Nanami nodded and stiffened. She whispered shyly, "Why yes, Shoto is my classmate." She bowed and clasped her hands together. "I'm Yoshino Nanami." Fuyumi's gaze expanded. Wow, you're even more well-mannered than Shoto said, that was a beautiful bow. With hesitation, Nanami said, Wanichan, it's really okay for me to stay over. Fuyumi approached and gave the agitated girl a head pat. Nanami raised her head to take a look. Nanami found Fuyumi's red hair patches to be rather appealing, and she was pretty. The woman was calmed by the tender expression in her eyes. Both Nanami and Shoto stiffened, uncertain of how to interpret the statement. I'm not too worried about you two, you seem shy and Shoto has about as much social skills as a caterpillar. So I doubt tonight will turn me into an auntie. Anyway, our father tends to leave before breakfast, so you should be fine to sleep here and head off to school after eating. Nanami gave a small nod. Fuyumi grinned again and walked away from the two. Your sister is very nice, I feel calm after speaking with her. He explained clumsily, I guess she has that effect on people because she's a preschool teacher. After giving her a quick glance, he went to lie down on his futon. As soon as he did, Nanami laid down in the one that was handed to her. With her back to her, Shoto grinned as a wave of serenity passed over her. She muttered, good night, Shoto, good night Nanami. Nanami gave her phone a dismaying glare. 6 of grandmother's calls were missed. She was aware that there would be problems if she disregarded it once more. Dusting off her skirt, she tightened her school tie. Fortunately, the ash from Katsuki's attack was simple to remove. She didn't want her family to know that. Her phone rang while she and Shoto were traveling to school, playing a rather melancholy tune. Before placing her phone to her ear, she inhaled deeply. Hello grandmother, I trust this morning is treating you well? Mashiro answered, so you finally picked up this time lucky? The woman's cold voice in her ear made her shudder. My apologies. I was staying at a classmate's house and I was having trouble finding an appropriate time to answer you. Well, I heard your class was attacked by villains not too long ago. You poor dear. You must have been so scared. She was taken aback by the worry in Mashiro's voice and her shoulders stiffened. She squinted suspiciously. Yes, it was quite terrifying, grandmother. The villains were quite brutal. They even gave All Might a bit of trouble. Nanami beckoned her to continue, saying, My, how unfortunate. I hope you don't feel too bad about this. After all, the fact that it was your class that was attacked can't be a coincidence. What a troublesome girl you are. As Nanami passed a bewildered Shoto, her eyes grew gloomy. I can't say I agree. My misfortune couldn't possibly be responsible for such a large event. It was carefully planned, and my quirk, unlike yours, does not influence people's minds. Mashiro was gasping. Did you only call me to discuss what happened? It really was quite scary, grandmother. I'd rather not relive it if that's fine with you. Watch your tone. I just thought I would let you know, dear, your grandmother will be coming over to watch the sports festival. And I will be looking forward to seeing you after school, Lucky. Her throat tightened with breath. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. She hung up after saying, Yes, of course. I look forward to seeing you. She squeezed her phone and glared at it. With caution, Shoto inquired, Nanami, are you all right? Nanami shuddered in subliminal anger. Damn it, was her quiet mutter. Damn it. She hurled her phone to the ground, causing Shoto and numerous other residents to be startled as the battery and phone itself fell out of its shell. She put her face in her hands and knelt down. What is wrong with me? I talked back. I'm not supposed to talk back. Shoto returned the touch. What did your grandmother say? She let out a deep sigh. She picked up the fragments of her phone, got up, and rearranged her backpack before saying, she'll be visiting for the sports festival. She practically vibrated with annoyance as she and her companion entered the school grounds. As Nanami entered Class 1A, her face was contorted into an odd frown. She didn't want Shoto to see her upset any longer, so she had left him in shock. All she wanted to do was sit down and be ignored as usual. The situation was made worse by the fact that most of her classmates appeared to be staring at her. When she noticed Izuku waving to her, her frown became less intense and more neutral. She waved back to him awkwardly, her cheeks flushed pink. She took a breath and closed her eyes. Be normal, Nanami. You are capable of doing that as well. She pondered. She walked over to Izuku with a smile on her face. Her voice cracked, and she winced as she said, Gee, good morning, Izuku. Izuku looked down at his notebook as his cheeks flushed. He hesitantly pressed the button on his mechanical pencil until the lead fell out, then said, Good morning, Nanami. Are you how are you? Everything all right? Before stopping in the middle and folding her hands behind her back, she started to tug on her hair. She grinned broadly and closed her eyes. She put a hand to her chest and said, No need to worry. I feel absolutely fine. Her brown eyes softened as she gazed at him. "We're best friends, right?" The boy with the green hair's eyes grew wide. He immediately imitated her smile. "Always." "Good. As long as that's true, I'm perfectly okay with what happened," Nanami replied. She was suddenly shivered by the sight of an approaching figure. Minetta's voice instantly dampened the fluttery atmosphere. "Hey, Yoshino. So I saw what happened between you and Midoriya yesterday. It's amazing how you can still be friends after how cold he was. You know, if you're looking for a good rebound, I'd be happy to assist." The class, which had been a hive of activity, suddenly fell silent. Mineta-kun. Izuku snarled. Jiro snarled and advanced on the idiot with the grape head. When Nanami held up her hand, she paused and said, "You little creep, why don't you back off?" When she saw the expression in Nanami's eyes, she ended her sentence, saying, "Nanami, you can't expect me to let this little jerk get away with." Nanami lowered her head to meet Minetta's gaze, her dark brown eyes gleaming. "Mineta-kun, Shoto told me how you told everyone about what happened between me and Izuku. Is that true?" she inquired quietly. He said, "Shoto, you mean Todoroki?" He smiled slyly at her and shook his head. "Yes, I told them. It was my duty after all. I wanted to make sure no one stepped on any toes while you were healing. Quite generous of me, don't you think?" Because of her conversation with her grandmother, Nanami was already in a particularly bad mood. "Last time I checked, that wasn't your business to tell." Before she was directly in front of him, she took a few steps in his direction. "Apologize." While pointing to Izuku, he said, "What? Why should I? I'm just offering you a good rebound. Midoriya should apologize. He's the one who broke your heart, not me." Some of his classmates gave him confused looks, and Izuku winced. On the back of her head, there was an irk mark. She inhaled deeply and gave him a fierce look. "Because if you don't apologize right now, I'm going to kick you across the freaking room," she yelled furiously. "That's such a violation of privacy that I don't even know how you could think this was okay." Katsuki's voice made Mineta tense. "Hey, Nana. What the fuck are you yelling about? It's weird, cut it out." The door caught the class's attention. Shoto had just arrived, so it wasn't just Katsuki. Uncertain whether to involve Katsuki, Nanami paused. Getting Katsuki involved had a 95% chance of causing explosions, but Shoto was already a wild card, so she wasn't sure how he would respond. Toru sprang forward to meet him. The invisible girl pointed accusingly at Mineta and yelled. Mineta blabbed to the whole class about Midoriya-kun rejecting Nanami-chan. "He's even hitting on her, asking her to rebound." The class fell into another ear-splitting silence. Nanami clapped her hands in front of her while closing her eyes. Her head lowered, and she started muttering something that could not be heard. Shoto approached her. He raised an inquisitive eyebrow and gave her a gentle head pat. "What are you doing?" Nanami maintained her posture and closed her eyes. She muttered gravely, "I'm praying that Aizawa-sensei will arrive before Katsuki murders him." Leaning against Shoto's hand, she let out a sigh and put her hands down. "I feel so scummy because I was going to beat him up." She could hear Katsuki being wrapped in Aizawa's binding scarf. "Sit down, that's enough of that. Don't get so rowdy first thing in the morning." "Whoa, sometimes praying does work, doesn't it?" She gave a small laugh. She sighed and rubbed the back of her neck as she turned to face Izuku. How embarrassing. As she bought some rice and chicken karage from Lunch Rush, Nanami hummed. Uncertain of where to sit, she rubbed the back of her neck. Looking around the cafeteria, she considered her options. "At the moment, I kind of don't want to sit with anyone in my class. A mixture of embarrassment and sympathy would make me feel less hungry." She sighed in thought. "And then there's what I did just prior to lunch." The sight of the familiar purple hair caused her eyes to widen. "Excellent. An icebreaker will be necessary, but I should be able to get in with him." She took a breath and ran over. Nanami yelled, "Shinso-kun, seriously? You went and challenged the whole class?" He almost dropped his curry plate as she wrapped her arm around his. Startled, he glanced back at his assailant, then calmed when he recognized her. "Yeah, and you were asleep during the whole thing and ruined the atmosphere when you woke up." The weary child laughed. "Though, I have to admit, what you did at the end caught me off guard." Nanami reddened. "Ah, yeah, earlier that day." When class ended, Nanami was fast asleep. In the background, she could hear the buzzing of conversation. A familiar voice echoed in her head, and beads of sweat trickled down. "Lucky, I can't wait to see you." When she opened her eyes and sat up, she noticed that her classmates had not yet left for lunch. She sat up and rubbed her eyes wearily. She got up and made her way to the front. When she heard the familiar voice, her eyes widened with excitement. I didn't cut it the first time around, but now I have another chance. If we do well in the sports festival, the teachers can decide to transfer us into the hero course. And of course, they'll probably have to transfer someone out to make room. Behind Suyu and Aoyama, Nanami stiffened and came to a stop. She wasn't used to this tone and wasn't sure if she had the right person. Scouting the competition? Maybe my peers are, but I'm here to let you know that if you don't bring your A game, I'm going to swoop in and steal your spot from right under you. Consider this a declaration of war. Before continuing, Nanami gazed at her classmates' tense backs. Her eyes grew wide with joy. Shinso-kun, I was right, it's you, she said, straightening her posture in embarrassment as she glanced around at the class. You did I miss something? Immediately, the tension between the two groups vanished. Shinso's eyes went wide with shock. He inquired, you're in the hero course? With a nervous tug on her hair, Nanami nodded. She pursed her lips together and glanced around the group. She grimaced gravely and said, Shinso-kun, if you don't tell anyone about my quirk, I won't tell anyone about yours. It's war, right? Shinso's eyebrow went up. Sure. At the sound of Minetta's voice, a scowl spread across the backs of a few heads. Ah, so you already had a rebound, huh? And here he is challenging your class. Geez, you know how to pick them, Yoshino. Nanami turned to look at him, and her eye twitched. Why choose such a depressing-looking guy though? When a foot struck Minetta's cheek and sent him flying back, everyone fell silent. Nanami scowled ominously at the unconscious boy as she lowered her leg. Glaring at the group in front of her class, she turned. She pushed her way through the crowd and headed to the cafeteria, saying, "Excuse me." Returning to the present, she laughed awkwardly, and Shinso grinned. He paused as he realized his statement might have been interpreted incorrectly. I wasn't expecting you to be in the hero course, miss 13 points. Uncomfortably, he rubbed the back of his neck. I don't mean it rudely. As they came to a table, she pulled at her hair and said, ah, she sighed quietly and sat down, saying, honestly, I should thank you. I only got in thanks to you, and I kinda feel horrible saying that. He sat opposite her and asked, what? Putting down her plate, Nanami timidly pulled at her hair. When she saw his eyebrow twitch, she waved her hand defensively and said, I only got in due to the rescue points I got from helping you. And not that I did that just for the points. I didn't know they were a thing until after I got my results, so. Shinso placed a poofing hand on her head. Nanami sighed and her eyes softened. Hey, it's okay. Don't worry about it, you deserve to get in. With a dry laugh, Shinso said, I wasn't expecting you of all people to kick that little guy in the face. Such a violent display. He felt her tense beneath his hand and grinned. You're full of surprises, Kaneko. Nanami's cheeks became flushed. Kaneko, is this because of that dog chasing me up the tree? I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a factor. Pushing his hand away, she focused on her meal and bit into a piece of rice. She sighed angrily. Geez, what is it, pick on Nanami Day? She grinned as she looked at the tense Shinso. If I'm a kitten, what does that make you? Before putting his head in his palm, he took a bite out of his curry. The intense look she gave him, as if she was seriously considering his nickname, startled him. Why don't you decide that? He asked. He lowered his head suspiciously. Don't choose anything weird. Nanami excitedly pointed her chopsticks at him as though she had a sudden insight. She exclaimed, Panda-kun. Panda, Shinso asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he continued to eat with his spoon. Are you making fun of me? Nanami gave a small laugh. Shinso blushed and glanced down at his curry. No, so this is actually really clever. Okay, so pandas are cute, and they look lazy, but they have claws and are actually dangerous. Just like you, Shinso said. She placed her fingers beneath her eyes and said, plus, and you're gonna love this one, they have dark circles under their eyes just like you. So from now on, you're Panda-kun. Shinso wiped her forehead with his spoon, leaving an irk mark on her head. You were making fun of me. Nanami chuckled. When you start sleeping more, I'll come up with something else. She wiped her forehead with a napkin. She picked up one karage with her chopsticks and held it out to him, saying, all right here. A formal apology in the form of crispy deliciousness. At the gesture, Shinso arched an eyebrow. In any case, he leaned across the table and opened his mouth to accept the karage, saying, there is nothing formal about this. When Shinso was abruptly shoved aside and a recognizable head of spiky blonde hair bit the karage in its place, Nanami's eyes widened. Katsuki, that wasn't yours. The angry blonde swallowed and walked over to sit next to Nanami, demanding, "What the hell are you two doing flirting so openly?" She was about to object when Katsuki threw his arm over her shoulder and drew her in closer. "You're the bastard from earlier. Who are you and what's your relationship?" With a sigh, Nanami shoved him away. He said plainly, "She's a lost kitten." The kick he got beneath the table made him wince and grin. With suspicion, he said, "We're friends. I'm Shinso Hitoshi. Who are you, her boyfriend?" "Can't say I find that idea all too safe." The question caused her eyes to widen. "No." Nanami looked at him with a look of surprise on her face and her eyes widened. "Yeah, I am. So excuse me if I don't want her feeding you." With a frown, she punched his arm. Hissing, "Hey, watch it." He put his chin in his palm and scoffed. "No, I'm not her boyfriend. I'm more like her guardian." She laughed at his title choice. As she gave Shinso another piece of karage, she pushed his head aside and put her hand on the side of his face. "This is Bakugo Katsuki, the class jerk. We are friends, but he has an undying need to bully those around him." Leaning across the table, Shinso took the chicken in his mouth and sat back while chewing. Nanami almost choked on her rice while trying to contain her laughter. "I believe that. What, is being an ass your kink?" she asked. With his hand gripping the table and smoking a little, Katsuki snarled. "I am going to enjoy kicking your ass at the sports festival." "Nana, what's this bastard's quirk?" Nanami chewed her chicken and deadpanned. "In exchange for him not telling anyone else my quirk, I'm not telling anyone Panda-kun's quirk." "Not that I'd tell you anyway," she murmured. She sighed, and that joke was cruel. "A boyfriend is the last thing I need." Katsuki pursed his lips, deciding that it would be better to stop talking and finish his meal. Nanami was changing her shoes and moving slowly. Mashiro would be waiting for her when she got home. She was trying desperately to think of an excuse for her unforgivable attitude, recalling the conversation from the morning. As she made her way down the school entrance, she nervously tugged at her hair. To be honest, she didn't want Shoto to meet her grandmother, even though he had offered to walk her home. Although it was tempting, Katsuki's demand that she visit his home would probably enrage the elder. Fortunately, the teenager had until she got home to figure out her plan. "Hey, Nanami, you wanna go to the mall with us before you go home?" Kyoka answered the phone. When Nanami turned around, she noticed that Izuku and a few other classmates were standing behind the earphone jack girl, waiting for a response. In contemplation, she bit her lip. She grinned a little. "Perhaps I could call mom and wait a little while." "Yeah, I'd love to." Uraraka ran up to her with excitement and joined her in a loop of arms. "Then let's book it. I want to get some ice cream on the way." Only a few feet had been covered by the students when a chilly voice yelled. Nanami instantly tensed up and withdrew her arm from Uraraka, saying, "My apologies, children. Lucky has to come home right away." She turned to see Mashiro waiting by the gate, dressed in a brown kimono. "Oh, my apologies, I'm sure you've never heard someone call her that." "Nanami, dear, tell your friends goodbye." Izuku scowled and walked over to Nanami, covering his mouth with his hand. He said warily, Nanami, do you know that lady?" In an attempt to quiet her racing thoughts, Nanami stiffened and moved away, placing a hand over her ear. "Although she shouldn't be here, grandmother is here." Mashiro cocked an indignant head. "Are you not even going to greet me, Lucky?" she asked, putting a hand to her mouth and narrowing her eyes in a way that suggested she was grieving. Her small circle of friends stared at her bewildered. Nanami straightened her back quickly. "Why yes, my deepest apologies," she said, bowing and looking directly at the ground while placing her hands in front of her. It took her a good 10 seconds to raise her head from the bow. "Hello grandmother, I trust the journey here was not a difficult one." When the blonde suddenly became formal, many of her classmates were taken aback. Mashiro's eyes wrinkled a little in pleasure. "Considering I haven't gotten home to cool down in this hot weather, in favor of picking you up from school, my trip could have been much better. So I hope you do not mind me interrupting your outing." She smiled as she approached her granddaughter. "I would like to talk with you about the incident. I wish to make sure you aren't having any nightmares. That won't be a problem, right?" "No, of course not." She bowed to her classmates, turned to face them, and closed her eyes. She straightened up and gave them a shaky smile, saying, "I apologize. While I would love to join you all, I must escort my grandmother home. I do hope you have fun, though." "Good girl, come along." Mashiro bowed her head and glanced at the pupils. Nanami turned to go, avoiding a look at them. The sensation of a powerful hand encircling her wrist made her wince. When Nanami turned to see Izuku's worried expression, her eyes grew wide. His hand grew a little tighter. His question was firm. Is everything okay? She gazed into his green eyes, then averted her gaze and pulled at her hair. She withdrew her wrist from his hold and said, "Of course." She grinned at him while closing her eyes. She said, "Everything is fine," and walked away. As he watched her leave, Izuku scowled. Uraraka said, "Deku-kun, what was that about?" "Oh it's nothing. It just looked like she didn't want to go," he said. As the two blondes moved farther away, Kirishima approached the boy with the green hair. He folded his arms and thought about the exchange, saying, "I dunno, it all seems fine to me. Her grandmother seems kind of nice. Maybe a little too traditional. I can see why she'd rather go to the mall. Maybe, but didn't she look kind of scared?" he inquired. "They don't play." Kaminari chuckled. "Ah, who isn't afraid of a strict grandma? I'm sure it's nothing, Midoriya, you worry too much." Izuku turned away, watching the two retreating figures, tensing and laughing uneasily. He clenched his fist, but no one else noticed that Nanami does more than just tug on her hair when she's anxious. There's a problem when she pulls on it while lying. Nanami exclaimed, "We're home." As she walked inside her home. The lack of reaction made her blood run cold. "Mom." Mashiro laughed. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Nanami's body start to shake. "Oh dear, Sakura should have told you. She's spending some time out to paint for a commission. She'll be home later, and your father has quite a bit of paperwork holding him back at the station. I'm afraid it's just you and me, Lucky." She touched the little girl's shoulder. "Now, why don't we have a little talk about your behavior this morning?" A little blonde girl bounced her shiny new ball while humming. She turned to face her mother, who was strolling down the crowded sidewalk next to her while toting two shopping bags. As they got closer to the crosswalk, the child stopped bouncing and carried her ball. She asked eagerly, "It's Hamburg for dinner, right?" The mother put a finger to her chin and cocked her head upward. She pondered teasingly, Hamburg sounds good. But only if I have a big strong helper to make it with me." The girl kept bouncing. She exclaimed, Me, I'm a strong helper," into her voice. Her mother ruffled her hair and cooed, "Oh, that's right, you are." The child's ball abruptly slipped from her once firm grasp. To get the desired object, the youngster dashed into the streets. The sound of a car horn caused her eyes to widen as she picked up the ball and turned to the side. "Nanami." The youngster was yanked roughly onto the sidewalk and out of the way. Pulling herself to her knees, she tried not to cry at the harsh treatment. Grinning, she turned to face the street. When she saw her mother in the air after being struck by the car, she screamed, "Mama, I'm okay." In a cold sweat, Nanami sat up. She glanced around nervously. She was in her chamber. There was a mist in the air, dark purple. She squinted and soon saw that the smoke was not coming from her quirk. She quickly pulled her blanket over her mouth and nose. She thought bitterly, grandmother's nightmare quirk. To think she'd be so bold as to use it when my parents are here. She opened her window and started using some loose leaf paper to fan out the mist. When she was satisfied with the state of the air, she let out a sigh and shut the window. The changing colors of the sky made her smile a little. Soon the sun would rise. The sound of her cat growling made Nanami wince. She narrowed her eyes toward the agitated cat. From a distance, she could see Mio crouched in the corner, snarling at nothing. She let out a sigh, understanding that her grandmother's peculiarity was likely having an impact on the poor creature. She walked over to the door and opened it, allowing him to escape the room for some fresh air. Tiredly, she rubbed her eyes and tried to shut the door, but a hand stopped her. Nanami flinched and stepped back. When she saw the frightfully familiar red eyes that met her gaze, the door creaked open and her eyes widened. One of the lanky men in all black approached her, his pale blue hair gleaming in the little sunlight. His chapped lips stretched and bled as a big, eerie smile came over his face. As Nanami remembered this person's name, tears pricked her eyes. Shigaraki Tamura. Shigaraki's red eyes widened with delight as he extended his hand. He spoke in his eerie, sickening voice, opening his mouth. "I can't wait to wrap my hands around that tiny little neck of yours." Her eyes grew wide as she frantically searched the area for a weapon to protect herself. Nothing. Suddenly, aside from her bed, her room appeared crazily empty. She bit her lip as her eyes grew wide. "I have nothing at all." Her mind raced. When she tried to scream for her father, nothing came out of her mouth. Shigaraki lunged for her throat, but she avoided him as she ran to her bed after taking another look around her room. Before he could take it off, she rushed out the door after yanking the blanket off her bed and throwing it in his face. She ran out the door without even putting on her shoes. Running down the sidewalk in just her pajamas, Nanami's heart thumping in her ears, she tried to think of a strategy. As she watched Nanami dash out the door, being pursued by whatever it was she was seeing, Mashiro grinned ominously. She had a tiny pipe in her mouth, and as she took it out, a soft purple smoke drifted around. She took a puff and blew out the window, this time letting out a typical white smoke. "My, I wonder what nightmare she's having," she said. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh. "Perhaps I pulled up a recent trauma." The elderly woman took another drag from her wooden pipe, as though to say, even I wasn't intending for it to go that far. As Nanami entered the park, her pace remained constant. "I've witnessed him move. He'll catch up to me because he's so fast. I have to find a busy place." Never looking back, she thought frantically. But he might murder someone. Her gaze expanded. "My goodness, I left him at home." When she realized, new tears streamed down her cheeks. What if he murdered my mother? How about Dad? When she bumped into someone and fell to the ground, her thoughts came to a halt. "Hey, watch where you're going, Nana." Relieved, Nanami looked up to see that she had met Katsuki while he was out for his morning jog. With tears running down her cheeks, she dropped to her knees and seized his arms. She started crying into his legs, unable to finish her sentence as she trembled violently in terror. Katsuki, we need to run." He's behind me. "He was in my room an," she exclaimed. Katsuki pulled her away and knelt down in front of her, saying, "Holy shit, calm down." He insisted, "Who was in your room?" She grabbed it with both of her hands, shocking him when he extended a hand to her. She blinked and glanced over her shoulder. We need to go. He's gonna catch you up," she said. Her gaze expanded. She had no one pursuing her. "Nana, I have no idea what you're saying." "What the fuck is going on?" asked Katsuki. His patience was wearing thin. He should've caught up. He's faster than me, so he. She grumbled. Then it occurred to me. She let go of Katsuki's hand and gazed at the floor, saying, "It was a nightmare. She can use it when I'm awake." How horrible. She sobbed loudly while covering her face with her hands and closing her eyes. She pressed her forehead to Katsuki's bewildered chest and kept sobbing. Change POV. In all honesty, Katsuki was relieved that people tended to stay away from this park in the morning. He didn't want to be seen crying all over himself in a hot mess. He was certain that he had never before seen Nana so frightened. He placed his hands tentatively on her shoulders and pushed her away, allowing him to see her face. It was a strange sight. She appeared frightened, perplexed, and irate. Her eyes were already starting to puff up from the intensity of her tears. It was a really ugly sight, and her face was red from everything. Calmly, he said, "Nana, tell me what happened." Katsuki wanted to scream, but he knew that would only make things worse. He needed to try to get the information out of her while remaining composed. She whispered. He growled angrily. "Nana." When he didn't hear back right away, he got up and dragged her to her feet. "Nanami," she exclaimed as she glanced up at him. "Tell me what happened before I kill you," he yelled. She drew back, staring at the floor. She wiped her eyes and said, I saw the man from the USJ, it was a nightmare. It was someone's quirk. He was in my room, and I ran. It felt so real that I didn't realize what was happening until just now." "So some bastard used their quirk on you. That's fucked up," he grumbled. Nevertheless, the boy was glad it was only a nightmare and not a real thing. He complained, "Come on, I'll take you home." He offered it to her after running his hand through his hair to remove any remaining perspiration. "And no," she cried out. He gave her a startled look. With her trademark doe eyes fixed on him, she grasped his hand once more. "Please no, I can't do it right now." Katsuki frowned, his determination eroding. He was getting softer because of this girl. She was shivering all over, and her eyes continued to dart around, looking for something that she was certain was not there. He glanced at her and frowned when he saw that she had no shoes on. A growl came out of his mouth. Katsuki turned and bowed his knees, his cheeks flushed pink. He was shocked at her nearly instant compliance when he said, "Get on my back, dumbass. I can't believe you ran out barefoot." He whispered, we're skipping school today. What? Don't fucking argue with me. You just had a fucking breakdown, you're not going. He said while he started to walk, his annoyance evident when she asked him why he had skipped. He jumped a little when he felt her slide down his back. You don't want to go to your house, so we're going to mine, and like hell am I letting the hag put ideas in your head while I'm at school. With a gentle sigh, Nana put her arms around him and leaned her head against his shoulder. Katsuki kicked open his home's door. Hey, hag, we're skipping school, call us in. The casualness of his statement surprised Nanami. Mitsuki's voice echoed loudly from the hallway. She flinched when she heard Mitsuki's heavy footsteps, saying, like hell you are. And who's this we? Just as the woman appeared, she made an effort to conceal her face. Nanami-chan, she questioned bewilderedly. She said, what happened? You look like a mess. Mitsuki approached the two and put his hand on the little girl's cheeks. Before glaring at her son, she noted, you've been crying. Katsuki, she inquired doubtfully. He grimaced and gave his mother a stern look. Don't fucking look at me like that, I didn't do anything. She hissed, watch your mouth. Her red eyes softened in concern as she turned to face Nanami. As she looked down, she noticed her slightly cut bare feet and said, you look like you've been through something. Oh gosh, do your parents know that you left home this early? The little girl tried to conceal her embarrassment by glancing at the ground. They don't, they were still sleeping. And they probably won't realize I ran off. Sometimes I jog before school and then head straight to UA, she said, glaring up at the woman. Don't tell them, please, they'll be disappointed. With a frown, Katsuki shuffled the girl on his back awkwardly. He impatiently demanded, are you going to call us off or not? She was involved in a quirk accident. As she considered it, Mitsuki placed a hand to her neck and rubbed it. Her eyes narrowed in worry as she studied the girl. Then she sighed deeply. She put her hands on Katsuki's hips and looked at her, saying, I suppose I'll give Yue a call. Katsuki, take her to the restroom and treat her wounds. I'll call the school and let them know neither of you are coming. Change POV. Izuku entered the classroom humming. When he noticed his classmate's empty seat, he inquired, Kachan isn't in. He's usually early. Disinterested, Aizawa approached him with his hands in his pockets. You know where Bakugo and Yoshino live, right? They both called out sick. Oh I know where Kachan lives, but not Nanami. Thinking, Aizawa ruffled his own hair. He went to his desk and handed the freckled boy a stack of papers, saying, I suppose she can make it up when she returns from school. Drop these off to Bakugo when you get the chance. Oh okay. He bowed before heading to his seat, carefully tucking the papers into his bag. Nanami as well, I'm hoping it's not spreading. Mitsuki cried out, your grandmother did what? The woman had pushed Nanami until she revealed the events that had shaken her so much after cornering her in the living room. They're just nightmares, the girl said shyly. She looked down and tugged at her fringe, saying, it's scary but it's harmless, it's not that big a deal. Not a big deal, you ran out of your house fucking barefoot. Katsuki barked. The boy was sitting on the couch next to Nanami, and he was clearly furious based on the multiple burn marks on his trousers. Mitsuki whispered, Katsuki, be quiet. She got up from the couch across from her and approached her visitor. She took her hands in hers and knelt down to her level, saying, Nanami-chan, this is a big deal. That's abuse. Look at you, you're too afraid to go home. You need to tell your parents. Didn't you tell me your father is a cop? She inquired. As she heard Mitsuki's words, Nanami started to shake and her eyes started to water. I won't. Grandmother doesn't live with us, so it's all right. Taking hold of her shoulders, Katsuki made her turn to face him. It's not all right. Tell them or I will. There's no reason for you to accept this. That bitch keeps doing this shit to you because you let her. Nanami yelled, I deserve everything I get. She pushed Katsuki away and withdrew her hands from Mitsuki. With tears in her eyes, she got up and moved away. My mother is in a wheelchair because of my quirk. A man's brakes that were perfectly fine 1 minute suddenly stopped working and she got hit because I ran into the street for some stupid ball. She said. She looked into his eyes, her eyes teary and pleading. My parents are too nice. It's my fault but they won't blame me. Everything grandmother does I accept because I deserve it. Because it's my fault, I won't tell them. And I'm begging you, she said. Please don't say anything, this is the only way I can atone for what happened. Mitsuki got to his feet and took her by the shoulders. She scowled and raised the little girl's chin to look at her. Nanami-chan, your mother did what she did because she loves you. Quirk or no quirk, I know she would do it again, she said. And she wouldn't be happy if she found out what was happening. If you won't say anything, then I want you to at least stand up to your grandmother. Nanami's gaze expanded. What? Katsuki is right, she'll keep doing it if you let her. So I want you to look that bitch dead in the eye, and tell her to fuck right off. I can't do that, she said. Nanami, Mitsuki yelled, you want to be a hero, right? Her piercing gaze made Nanami wince, and she nodded. There's a villain in your house. She's manipulating you and your parents. If you don't do something, it will never end. Nanami's gaze expanded. She turned to face Katsuki, who was glaring at her expectantly from the couch. Smugly, he crossed his legs and folded his arms. The two women stared at him. How about a bet, Freckles? If I win the sports festival, know when I win, you have to confront that bitch and call her out for what she is. How's that? Nanami thought about the bet and twiddled her thumbs. If I win, or at least, if you lose, then you have to keep this a secret. He frowned at her circumstances. Fine, it's a deal. Mitsuki raked her hand through her hair and arched an eyebrow. It seemed to her that this was as good as it could get. Nanami nodded, then bowed slightly and left. Nanami-chan, go to Katsuki's room. I have to talk to him real quick. Until Nanami's footsteps ceased, the mother silently gazed at her son. She gave a sly smile. She said, you like her, don't you? Katsuki glared at her, his face flushed. What the hell are you talking about? Mitsuki gave a casual shrug. To his annoyance, she reached out and ruffled his hair, saying, I'm just saying if this were happening to anyone else you would have just exploded them and demanded they stop being weak. She put a patronizing hand to her chest and smiled, saying, you were very patient with her. I was impressed. You have similar tastes to your mother. She's mild-mannered like your dad. Uncertain of how to interpret that analogy, Katsuki frowned. So what? She urged, so be aggressive. She briefly left the room and came back holding a towel. When I first saw your dad, I just went for it and never gave up. She trusts you, you've got that going for you. She said, give her this hot towel, it might score you some points. He rubbed the back of his head nervously as his eye twitched. I'm going up now. He snatched the offending cloth, then marched up the stairs with a big, random bag of chips. Change POV. Nanami was lying on Katsuki's bed, thinking about what she had been told while gazing up at the ceiling. With a sigh, she turned over on her stomach and buried her face in his pillow. The scent of firewood emanating from practically everything in this place calmed her. When the door opened, she turned to see Katsuki carrying a bag of chips and her face flushed. Her body bounced as he sat down roughly. A warm towel landed on her face, causing her to yell. He complained. The hag told me to give that to you. He observed her pressing the towel against her swollen eyes and said, this whole shitty situation pisses me off. She winced and made a sound to get him to stop saying, you irritate me. He opened the bag of chips and stuffed some into his mouth, saying, you're too fucking passive. And you're always thinking about what other people want instead of what you want. Staring at the wall was easier, he decided. People like you are the worst. With timidity, she questioned, does that mean you hate me? Katsuki stiffened at her question. In an attempt to block out the heat in his face, he ate more chips furiously. He turned back to watch her reaction, but he couldn't see her eyes because of the warm towel. Shit would be a whole lot simpler if I did. He stopped himself when he said, I wish I hated you, but instead I'm stuck liking, because the word made him feel strange. Not hating you. After a few minutes of sitting silently, Nanami sat up and took the towel off her less swollen eyes. Her messy hair from her tossing and turning on the bed made his cheeks heat up as he looked at her. He said clumsily, your hair is getting longer. Huh. Nanami gently tugged at the edge of her curls and looked at it. She got down on her knees and sat next to him on the bed. Yeah, I guess it is, she said. She smiled at him and said, thanks, Katsuki, for helping me, you know. Your attitude has changed a bit towards me, hasn't it? His cheeks brightened, and he averted his eyes from hers. He sneered, shut up, I haven't changed at all. He gave her the bag of chips. She probably took a few out of courtesy even though she cringed at the taste of wasabi. He smirked as he said, you're the one who changed. I remember when you couldn't look me in the eye and couldn't talk without stuttering. Nanami gave a small laugh. She poked his side with her finger and smiled when he wriggled, saying, Yeah, but now I can glare and yell at you properly even when you threaten to kill me. Before settling into a neutral expression, she paused, pondering what to say next. By the way, you should apologize to Izukun. Katsuki frowned. What? She looked him in the eye and scowled. She glanced at her lap and said, Katsuki, I heard what you told him the day we met. Take a swan dive off the roof. You literally told him to kill himself. That was a horrible thing to say. What if he actually did it? The boy with the explosive sneered. Deku wouldn't. She fumbled with the cuff of her sleeve and said, do you know that for sure? When I first saw him he was absolutely terrified of you and he had no confidence either. If you aren't going to apologize for what you put him through all these years, you should at least apologize for that. He paused for a moment, considering what she had said. He concluded by saying, I won't apologize. Katsuki. He snorted at the idea, saying, that bastard is focused on the future. So am I. Bringing up the past won't fix anything. He stretched the word mockingly, saying, besides, I hate that damned nerd. I could care less if he forgives me. The idea made him laugh. Why should I care? We aren't friends and we never will be. As she took in what he had told her, Nanami pursed her lips. She put her head on his shoulder and yawned, saying, I suppose this is ultimately between you and him. The action made him tense. Hey, I just realized something. She smiled playfully as she raised her head slightly to gaze at him. You called me Nanami back in the park, didn't you? Katsuki's gaze expanded. He averted his gaze, mocking the foolishness of her inquiry. Don't make a big deal out of it. That's your fucking name, isn't it? Nanami gave a small smile. Her smile widened and she leaned in closer, making him lean farther away. I like hearing you say it. Hey, will you say it again? Fuck no. He leaned away once more as she leaned closer and laughed. Come on, just one more time. Say Nanami. I will not. You're pushing it today, doe eyes. Just say it. I said no, please. With a growl, Katsuki finally let go of the miniature explosions he was holding. She instantly retreated. She looked down in a pout, puffing out her cheeks. As he considered his next words, he rubbed the back of his neck. Officially, it was awkward. He looked at her, trying to think of something appropriate to talk about. He whispered, you don't tug on your hair as much. She looked at him questioningly, and he winced at what he had said. Oh yeah, I'm trying to break that habit. Sometimes it happens without me realizing, though. She chuckled awkwardly. She let out a small sigh as she gazed at the bandages covering her feet. You won't even say it one more time. Katsuki gritted his teeth and felt a vein throb on his head. Oh, for fuck's sake, fine, he said, reaching over and placing his hands on her cheeks as she turned to face him. Nanami nodded and said, pay the fuck attention because I won't say it again. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. She was completely focused on him, and her eyes were as bright as ever. She had pink cheeks, but he wasn't sure if that was because he grabbed her face or because she was embarrassed. His eyes dropped a little, and his cheeks flushed when he saw that his hold made her lips pucker a little. He drew her a little nearer to him as he glanced up at her once more. He ran his thumb across her cheek and licked his suddenly parched lips. Nanami. The closeness had now turned her cheeks red. Why yesh. If he looked closely enough, he could see his reflection in her wide eyes. He gritted his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut. He took a sharp breath, shoved her away, and got out of bed. Go the fuck to sleep. You look annoyingly exhausted. The sudden push knocked Nanami back onto her elbows. She watched him walk out the door and winced as he slammed it shut, saying, okay. She lightly touched her lips with her fingers. Did he nearly. Katsuki leaned against his room's door on the other side. He was trying to stop his heart from beating so fast that his face was flushed. I almost. Shit. Nana walked next to Katsuki and yawned. As they made their way to the girl's house, the sun had just begun to rise. He yawned as if to underline his point, saying, it's too damn early for this. I can't believe you left your uniform at home. Nana hissed. Look, I said I was sorry, didn't I? She gave her neck a quick rub. Gonna be honest, sneaking to your house every night is exhausting, she exhaled. She scratched her cheek sheepishly and said, we're lucky my family thinks I'm leaving early every day because of the sports festival. She chuckled as she remarked, my dad is especially gullible. I told him that I was sneaking out the window as a form of training and he believed me. Katsuki raked a weary hand through his hair. He stifled his own yawn and complained, I don't know what you want me to do about it. My parents don't want you sleeping at your house while that old bitch is there. When she attempted to pull her hair, he slapped her hand. Stop that, you're gonna get a bald patch when you're older. She rubbed her hand and sighed. The sports festival is today, I'm kind of scared, she murmured. Besides our little bet, this is going to be our chance to get noticed by pro agencies. Yeah, and I bet every last one of them will be begging for me. Nana accelerated her pace and rolled her eyes. Yeah, but who would want to ask someone with the power of bad luck to join their agency, even temporarily? Katsuki, trailing behind her as her house appeared, questioned, have you always been this annoying? I'll wait out here. Go get changed, Freckles. She gave a nod and walked over to her window on the side of the house. She started climbing up the tree outside her window, and Katsuki watched with curiosity. He questioned whether her strength had always existed. She moved in a way that made him think of a chipmunk or a squirrel. She went inside after pushing her window open. Leaning against the brick wall enclosing her home was Katsuki. Now that I think about it, I've never been inside her house. Her room must be incredibly girly. In an attempt to conceal his blush from everyone, he pressed his hand to his mouth. I'm going to have to knock on her door, isn't that right? What on earth am I meant to say? His expression changed to a sly smile as his eyes widened in realization. Perhaps the door will be opened by that elderly hag. He pondered somewhat malevolently. I'd love to see what expression she'll have if I say I know what she's done. Katsuki's red eyes narrowed in anticipation as he finally approached the door after a few minutes. He placed his hands in his pockets after knocking on the door. He didn't require any explosions, particularly in the presence of Nana's father. A brunette gentleman emerged as the door opened with a click. He cocked his head, looking at Katsuki's uniform. Katsuki nodded, Nanami's classmate. Nana's father grinned with insight. Ah, you must be Midoriya Izukun. Katsuki's head developed an irk mark on the back. Don't think I'm that nerd. He yelled bitterly. As a woman in a wheelchair protruded her head from behind him, the man arched an eyebrow and said, Oh, you must be the rude but fun one. Bakugo, right? Katsuki's gaze flickered. Nana had apparently told her parents about him in that way. His cheeks turned pink. Yeah, that's me. I came too, he said. Hold on, aren't these her parents? He didn't finish his thought when he looked to the side and noticed an older woman in a blue kimono approaching them. Will they think I'm dating if I say I'm walking her to school? He asked himself. Hajime, Sakura, coffee is ready, is everything all right? Katsuki spoke before Hajime could reply. He stated firmly, Bakugo Katsuki. I'm here to walk Nana to school. Hajime stiffened. Walking her to school. Why you two aren't? Sakura scolded him. Hajime let that poor boy in. Instead, Nana's grandmother placed a hand on Hajime's shoulder and said, Yes, it's rude manners to leave a guest at the door. As Katsuki entered and took off his shoes, she turned to call upstairs. A pleasure to meet you, Bakugo-kun, I'm Nanami's grandmother. You may call me Mashiro. Lucky, your boyfriend has come to walk you to school. He looked away from Hajime as his face brightened. Bakugo-kun, it'll be a few minutes before it's time to leave. Would you like some coffee or tea? Hajime responded. When Katsuki heard Nanami's father clenching his teeth, he arched an eyebrow. As he passed him, he hummed, Tea is fine. I don't need to be jittery when I win the sports festival. What confidence, Lucky could learn a thing or two from you. Hajime, prepare the tea. I'd like to speak to this young man. Mashiro exclaimed with delight. As her mother walked into the living room with a puzzled Katsuki in tow, Sakura laughed and excused herself to the kitchen. What did this happy old hag do to Nana? I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't witnessed the aftermath myself. He sat down on the couch with a frown firmly fixed on his face. I'll have some fun. Nana will deal with this bitch herself. Her dad has excellent hearing, so I should watch what I say. You do know about her quirk, right? Nothing has happened to you? Mashiro asked earnestly as she sat across from him. Bakugo-kun, you're such a courageous boy, dating Lucky like this. Katsuki frowned. Nothing has happened. He leaned forward and used his hand to prop his head up while resting his elbow on his knee. I'm more interested in you, Granny. Nana told me all about your relationship. When Mashiro stiffened, he grinned. Did she now? His arms were crossed and he leaned back. Yes, all about how you help her with her nightmares. Gotta say it's really interesting. Gotta say, No one makes her feel the way you do. When Mashiro realized Katsuki's trick, her eyes darkened. My, what a flatterer you are. I assure you, our dear Nanami gives me too much credit. She's always had an active imagination. He thought angrily, bullshit, an active imagination. Just as he opened his mouth to continue, two arms encircled him from behind the couch. When he saw Nana, he turned his head to the side and flushed. The sense of her trembling made him tense. "Kei Katsuki, are you bothering my poor grandmother?" he asked. The class representative shifted to the front of the couch and bowed to Mashiro, saying, "We should get going. You know how the class representative gets when it comes to tardiness." She took Katsuki's arm and pulled him to the door, saying, "Katsuki is foul-mouthed and can be quite vulgar. I hope he hasn't said anything to offend you, grandmother. Goodbye." She sped past Hajime and Sakura as they were leaving the kitchen. He called, "Why, you're leaving already? We wanted to talk with your boyfriend Nanami." "Sorry, we wanna be early, Mom." And he isn't my boyfriend." Change POV. As she walked next to Katsuki, Nanami was furious. "What were you thinking, talking to her so passive-aggressively? Are you insane?" He grinned as they made their way to the school, saying, "Shut up, it's not that big a deal. I just wanted to see if she'd react." Glancing down, he took her hand. "Focus on the sports festival, Nana. You're worried about the wrong things right now." He laughed. His firm hold on her hand caused Nanami to flush. Worried about? She suddenly remembered their previous conversation and became anxious once more. "Oh yeah, all those hero agencies will be watching," she said. Katsuki gave her hand a squeeze. He turned to her, his cocky grin widening to an annoying extent, and said, "If you want to get noticed, you just have to murder everyone else before you lose to me." He halted and stepped in front of her, then leaned down and pressed his face against Nanami's as she almost bumped into him, saying, "All those other extras don't stand a chance against me. When I win, you're gonna be thanking me after you tell that crazy-ass bitch of a grandmother off." She quickly released his hand and stepped back, but she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with his closeness. She was reminded of the day they skipped school and the near miss that occurred that morning. Her eyes flicked down to his lips and her face flushed bright red. She slammed them shut and pushed Katsuki until he almost fell. She squeaked, "Why, you're too close." She glanced up at him after glancing at her hands, and the dangerously aggressive expression on his face made her go pale. "You, Nana," he gave a low growl. "Ah ha ha, she edged around him slowly. "Sorry," she said, and ran off. "Get back here right now." As he walked into the classroom, Izuku extended his arms. When Nanami dashed into the room at a speed he didn't know she could reach, he almost fell. "And Nanami, what's wrong?" Entering the utility closet, she yelled, "Nothing, good morning. Please pretend you didn't see me." She shut the door behind her and remained silent. Before an explosive Kachan rushed into the room, a few of the other students present stared in bewilderment. He demanded, "All right extras, where the fuck is she?" Everyone in Class 1A returned to their activities as if they had realized what was happening, with nobody daring to glance in the direction of the utility closet. Izuku cautiously inquired, "Kachan, what happened?" "None of your damn business, Deku. Where the fuck is Nana?" he yelled. "And Nanami?" I have no idea," he said, trying to look away while laughing uneasily. Knowing full well that he was a horrible liar, Izuku could feel his classmates looking at him. Kachan narrowed his eyes and continued to stare. Izuku tried to maintain a straight face while he stared back, his shoulders stiffening. His gaze briefly shifted to the utility closet before returning to the blonde in front of him. Todoroki stepped in front of the closet, causing him to stop as he ran toward it. "Ha!" he exclaimed. "Get out of the way, icy hot. Are you attempting to harm Nanami in any way?" he insisted. "None of your fucking business, piss off. It is my business if you intend to attack her." Change POV. A faint yelp was heard by Katsuki just before Nana leapt out of the closet and put her arms around Todoroki's. No, I'm fine. It's fine. Everything is fine. The sports festival is today, we should focus on that." "Okay, yeah, no need for violence of any kind," she cried out in fear. He gave the shorter girl a fierce look. She had the grating urge to interrupt him whenever he got into a fight with the half-baguette. He focused his attention on how firmly she held his arm. Gritting his teeth, he walked over to his desk. When Todoroki put his hand on her shoulder, he looked at them and felt a throb in his veins. That asshole, how about she pushes him away? Isn't he too near? He heard the conversation between the bastard and Nana. He became even more irate when Deku soon joined the discussion. She pouted as Todoroki gestured toward him. Pushing her in the direction of Katsuki, he patted her back after releasing his arm from her hold. As Nana approached him, Katsuki noticed that her cheeks were pink, which he liked. She clung to her fringe and fiddled with it, saying, "Katsuki, I apologize for pushing you. I was embarrassed." She spoke softly so that only he could hear. I remembered what you and I panicked. Katsuki's face heated up and his eyes widened. He scoffed and lowered his head to conceal his blush. When his favorite line failed to escape his lips, he scowled. "Whatever. Make sure it doesn't happen again or I'll just fuck off already." As Nanami ran off to Deku and Todoroki, he glanced over at her, his eyes more neutral as they both patted her head and appeared to commend her. She tried to conceal her embarrassment by covering her eyes. Nanami was clutching the small blue charm that her mother had given her the previous evening. It was a tiny blue bag adorned with tiny pink flowers. The success characters were sewn onto it. She turned to look behind her and was surprised to see Uraraka looking over her shoulder. "Hey Yoshino-chan, what's that?" she asked. She placed it in her pocket and patted it while letting out a little sigh. It's a good luck charm. My mom got it for me, just for this festival, to replace my stone." Her friend drooled. "Your mom sounds super sweet. Hey, just know I think you'll do great." After giving a nod, Nanami turned to face the table. Her mind started racing, and her eyes glazed over. "It was crazy this morning, and now I have to worry about my foolish wager." Izuku had been confronted by Shoto, and the obvious declaration of war had startled her into realizing what was happening. "I must prevail." She clung to her charm. "Mom got this specifically for me. If I lose, I'll have to be careful." Iida rushed into the waiting area before she could finish thinking. "Everyone get your game faces on. The festival is beginning." As she and numerous other students made their way down the lengthy hallway toward the arena, Nanami silently prayed to her good luck charm. "I must defeat Izuku. I must defeat Shoto." They were at the front before she knew it. Additionally, Katsuki was called by midnight to serve as the first-year representative. "Katsuki must be defeated by me. I just wanna say, I'm gonna win." The blonde's directness made Nanami and many of her classmates wince. Iida reprimanded with stiff hand gestures, "Why would you say something so disrespectful? You're representing our whole class." Katsuki turned and looked directly at Nanami. He looked around the arena and gave a thumbs down, saying, "I'm just telling the truth. I will win, and no one here will stop me. It's not my fault the rest of you losers are stepping stones for my victory." She moaned, struggling to keep her racing heart under control. When he said that, didn't he look directly at me? When he bumped shoulders with Izuku, she frowned. Nanami inhaled deeply before raising her head and giving him a fierce look in return. He came to a halt and gazed at her. Her gaze was hard and her fists were clenched. Her words were visible to him and the rest of the class. "I don't need to prevail. All I need to do is defeat you." In the obstacle race, Nanami lagged behind the majority of her classmates. She arrived at the fall, as her companions were starting to walk the tightrope. She stepped back a few paces and let out a low-pitched curse. She filled her charm with as much misfortune as she could. Quietly, she told herself, "Don't die." When she jumped, Kyoka and Ashido both screamed as she ran past them. Before she grabbed the rope and hauled herself up in the air, it seemed as though she had fallen to her death. Despite landing on the platforms, she continued to move. When she missed, she grabbed to swing and propel herself, but she kept going, jumping off the ropes. She continued to move, flipping in the air to gain momentum. Everyone was tense because it resembled a trapeze act. She caught a glimpse of Shoto and Katsuki's backs. She and everyone else were far behind the two. She was aware that it would be nearly impossible to win a race like this. However, there would undoubtedly be more opportunities to advance. When Nanami finally touched down on firm, stable ground, she staggered forward. Running forward, she spat off to the side. This is no time to gawk. Change POV. Sakura sat next to Mashiro on the couch while they watched the festival together. She clutched her mother's hand frantically as she watched Nanami's careless trapeze act. Mashiro questioned, "Has Nanami always been so reckless, Sakura?" She had been shocked to see her shy and weak granddaughter so enthusiastically enter the competition. "No, though, maybe she wants to get noticed by a good hero agency so she's pushing herself," replied Sakura. Her hand touched her chest. But still, she's usually so cautious, I hope she doesn't get hurt. When her mother gave her a reassuring pat on the hand, she smiled. Mashiro turned to the screen and said, I say we just watch and enjoy the show, my dear. Lucky is just full of surprises. Change POV. Confused, Nanami watched Izuku. Many of the bombs in the mine were being dug out by him. She turned to face the minefield and shook her head. Bump marks in the dirt made it clear where the bombs were placed. I wonder if, she extended her hand and lightly touched the floor, letting go of a small portion of her bad luck. As she watched the smoke seep into the ground to be absorbed by the bomb, she thought, perhaps my quirk can cause them to malfunction. Okay, she snatched up a pebble and hurled it violently onto the bump. She stepped back a few paces and waited. The absence of an explosion caused her eyes to widen. It worked. Nanami had run where her smoke was drawn in and allowed it to travel in a straight line. She glanced over her shoulder and saw people running wherever she went. She bit her lip, trying to think of something to do. With a mumbled apology, she closed her eyes and clapped her hands together. I've never attempted to undo my bad luck, is that even possible? She pondered. She tried to regain her bad luck by running faster and taking heavier steps. The sound of explosions made her wince. When she saw that her attempt had only brought back half of the bad luck she had deposited, she grimaced. I'll need to remember that. She was a little relieved to see that those behind her were now reluctant to follow her. I can let it out easily, but taking it back is harder. Present Mike's voice boomed, clever girl. Class 1A's Yoshino reactivated the bombs at random. No one wants to follow her now. Given that the outcomes were accidental, Nanami blushed uneasily at the compliment. Suddenly, behind her, there was a deafening explosion. Izuku was riding a big piece of metal from the robots earlier, and when many people looked up, they saw him flying far above them with a trail of smoke trailing behind him. With a groan, she continued to walk. Those who dared to follow Nanami left an open path as she ran, forgetting the idea of taking back her misfortune. As she ran through the tunnel to the arena, her lungs were burning. When she reached it safely, she collapsed to her knees. She moaned and collapsed back onto her rump, wiping the perspiration from her brow and panting, saying, I think, I made it, maybe. Looking around, she could see that she was at least ninth. Shoto approached her and knelt down. He prepared a big ice cube in silence and presented it to her. With a clumsy smile, Nanami put it in her mouth to melt and replenish her fluids. He pulled her off the ground and she took his outstretched hand. Dusting the blonde's shoulder, he said, You're working hard, Nanami. You must want to win. She nodded after swallowing the melted water in her mouth. Yeah, I'm lagging behind but I won't give up, she said, looking uncomfortably at the sizable crowd. She put one hand over her face and said, It's kind of hard to focus with all these people though. Honestly, I'm using most of my willpower not to run away somewhere. Shoto cocked his head, then raised his hand and kuffed it onto her head. He suggested, Forget about them and focus on the events. As they waited for the remaining competitors to enter the stadium, Nanami nodded and he handed her another ice cube. As she watched Katsuki get angry over his third-place finish, she thought, It's only going to get harder from here. I must defeat Katsuki, she said, glaring at the floor and pursed her lips. Her cheeks turned pink as she heard the explosive boy muttering curses under his breath. After I do that, the entire festival can be awarded to the person who truly deserves to win. I say that, but why does it feel almost as though I want him to win? As she put on the orange cheerleading uniform, Nanami hesitantly said, Yaoyorozu-chan, are you sure Aizawa-sensei said to wear these? She nervously glanced up at the taller girl. It just doesn't feel like something that belongs in the sports festival. I do understand your doubts, but a hero's job is to make people happy along with saving them from villains. I wouldn't put it past Yue to have this kind of competition, was her graceful response. Nanami covered her navel with pom-poms and pursed her lips. Why does it have to be skirts and a crop top? Pulling on her skirt, Ashido cocked her head. Yoshino-chan, you really don't like wearing skirts and stuff, huh? What's up with that? Nanami covered her face with her fringe as she flushed. I'm not very girly in the long run, things like this don't suit someone as uncute as me. And it's just that I don't like showing off so much skin, she murmured. It's indecent. Plus skirts tend to bring attention to my wide hips. The pinkett shook her classmate by the shoulders and exclaimed, What? Yoshino-chan, you're totally cute. You have those doe-like eyes, and those adorable freckles. You have that sweet little sister image to you. Guys love that. Her chest felt as though an arrow had been driven through it. She leaned her head against the wall and said, a little sister type, huh? Izukun also said that, ha ha. Perhaps I'm just that unattractive to people of the other gender. She gave a dry laugh. Ashido stiffened. Oops, looks like I brought up some raw feelings, she said, placing her hand on Nanami's shoulder. She took Nanami by the wrist and escorted her out the door with the other girls, saying, you should have more confidence. I'm pretty sure any guy would be lucky to date you. As she and her classmates walked into the arena, Nanami lowered her head. When she noticed that nobody else was wearing cheerleading attire, her gaze flitted around and she became motionless. She started to cry out of embarrassment. Present Mike joked, Class 1A is going full on fanservice everyone. I showed my navel to everyone for no reason, Nanami said, squatting down and covering her face with her pom-poms. She ignored the pat she received in return. Her eyes met narrowed red eyes as she peered up through her pom-poms. When Katsuki looked at her, his cheeks were dusted pink and his face was fixed in a glare. She hid behind her pom-poms, hot tears streaming down her face. I'm not interested in finding out what Izukun thinks, but even Katsuki is disgusted. The more she considered it, the more embarrassed she became. She turned to look at Katsuki again, but he averted his eyes. Do I really look that awful? Nanami leaned her head gently against the table and sighed. She was worn out from the human cavalry battle, but she had advanced to the fighting stage, and the recreation round wasn't particularly enjoyable either. She let out a moan against the table and then stood up to move around the waiting area. She glanced at her bouncy balls and slingshot and asked, I'm fighting Tokiyami-kun, how can I possibly beat him in his dark shadow? Maybe I should have brought the red balls after all, she murmured. The 4 colors were placed on the table by Nanami. She explained the functions of the colors white, blue, green, and purple as well as how they might be able to overcome her opponent, who seemed invincible. The purple ball caught her attention. She thought about the time she nearly used it on Shigaraki Tamura. Most of the time, she would wake up with her hands on her neck because his piercing red eyes had haunted her dreams. I pleaded with Katsuki a few times to sleep with me, but I suppose I can see why he consistently refused. She sighed. She gave a headshake. She combed her hair and said, now isn't the time for those thoughts. She moaned as she pressed her forehead against the table, saying, Yaomomo didn't even stand a chance against him and she's super smart and can make anything. How can I possibly beat him if she couldn't? After putting her belongings away, she left the room. You all right, Kaneko? Nanami was relieved to see Shinso when she turned around. She rushed over and threw her arms around him, pressing her face into the chest of the rather tall boy. Panda-kun, she exclaimed. I'm freaking out, what am I supposed to do? Shinso stiffened, glanced around the corridor, and then patted her head awkwardly. You see this? This is why I came to check on you. He exhaled. She nodded and said, you're up against that bird guy aren't you? Actually, I'm not sure what to tell you. You were really passionate in the first few rounds. And honestly going against that guy with the laser really showed off your fighting style so your opponent may already have a plan to beat you. She gave him a violent shake. You're so mean. You came here just to tease me, didn't you? On her shoulders, Shinso placed his hand. I lost to Midoriya. I'm rooting for you because we're the same Yoshino. His smile was dry. Putting his hand on her head and stroking her hair reassuringly, he explained, I brought you into my group because I noticed in the human cavalry race that you had problems partnering up when you told people your quirk. Your quirk is unfortunate like mine. That's why I want you to win. As Nanami listened to his attempt at a motivational speech, her face brightened and her cheeks turned red. Panda-kun, you're such a great person, she said, covering her embarrassment with another hug. With a clumsy laugh, he patted her head. When Katsuki said, what the hell are you two doing in the middle of the hall? Nanami stiffened. Come here, Freckles. She was about to approach him when Shinso grabbed her by the back and drew her back into his chest. He challenged, don't treat her like a dog. In an attempt to calm him, Nanami put her arms around his waist and bit her lip. With a frown, Katsuki approached them. He took Nanami's arm and yanked her away, saying, don't act like she's yours. She's not a dog, idiot. Her back was against his chest when she yelled, and his arm was diagonally wrapped around her to keep her from escaping. With his free hand flexing explosively, he declared, Nanami is mine. So stop being so damn friendly with her. The three teenagers were silent as they processed the explosive blonde's words. Nanami's face was flushed and her eyes were wide. She nodded her head in agreement with Shinso, indicating to him in silence that it was acceptable for him to go. After biting his lip, Shinso reached into his pockets. He called and said, "You're a real asshole." When Nanami saw the blank stare in his eyes, her face lit up with recognition and she said, "Watch who you're after him." Shinso calmly gave the order, "Let her go and take at least 5 steps back." Satisfied, he watched as Katsuki let her go and retreated a short distance. He patted Nanami's head and glanced at her, saying, "Good." He gave a single wave before turning to leave. "You seem to have your hands full with this one. I'll cheer for you, okay?" he said. With a nod, Nanami turned back to face Katsuki. She puffed out her cheeks as she approached him. "You're so confusing," she said, punching his arm as she watched him break out of his reverie with satisfaction. He gave her a downward glance. "Don't say things like that. Shinso-kun might have gotten the wrong idea." Katsuki's eyebrow went up. "And what's the wrong idea?" Nanami turned red and averted her eyes. She gave a timid response, that we're dating." With a sneer, Katsuki grabbed her chin and cocked her head to face him. "Maybe I want him to get the wrong idea. Ever consider that, Nana?" Because Katsuki was so confident, her blush had reached her ears. She pushed him away and spun around right away. After saying, "Don't joke around like that, you jerk," she fled in the direction of the fighting arena, leaving Katsuki by himself in the hallway. Up next we got Lady Luck from Class 1A. Yoshino Nanami. Her opponent, shrouded in mystery, also from Class 1A, it's Tokiyami Fumikage. As Nanami entered the ring, she bit her lip. She was staring at Tokiyami while holding her slingshot tightly. She started to spread her legs wide in anticipation. "It was Dark Shadow," he cried. His sentient quirk stepped forward, aiming for her chest with a blow. "Keep Nanami around," she reminded herself. She leapt to her feet and did a rigid cartwheel to get out of the way. "I'll get close and use a smoke bomb." She sprinted directly at Dark Shadow, then placed her hands on his beak and sprang to her feet, balancing on the monster's back. She heard Tokiyami shout, "Throw her off, Dark Shadow," in a hazy voice. As she was launched into the air, Nanami let out a yelp. She straightened up, took a ball from her pouch, and hurled it at the beast that was flying up after her. When she saw that she had fired the purple ball rather than her blue one, her eyes narrowed in shock. "Shit," she whispered to herself. When the flash grenade's light struck Dark Shadow, he flinched. Nanami's recognition caused her eyes to widen. "Wait, what?" With one purple ball in her hand, she ran towards him with a shaky smile. She evaded Dark Shadow and fired once more, eagerly observing his diminution and subsequent concealment behind Tokiyami. After one hop, she switched to a front flip. She moved swiftly in front of Tokiyami, pushing him down with her feet on his shoulders. With her legs pinning his arm, she sat on his chest and pointed her slingshot straight at him. "Say you give up, Tokiyami-kun. I know your weakness and I have plenty of these left," she yelled. Tokiyami sighed and dropped his head after growling. "You've bested me. I surrender." Midnight yelled, "Yoshino wins. Tokiyami has surrendered." Nanami left their precarious position as soon as possible. She extended her hand to him and grinned when he accepted her assistance, saying, "It looks like luck was on my side for a change." Change POV. As Katsuki saw Nana totally take over the bird's mind, he grinned. He was confident that they would eventually face one another. She would have to face that old bitch if he prevailed, of course. He intended to celebrate by asking her out to dinner after she did. Everything was proceeding as planned. For the most part, he hadn't anticipated the drowsy-looking jerk pursuing her first. Although Katsuki was unsure of their relationship, he was annoyed by Nana's lack of affection for Deku. He was irritated that Deku defeated the bastard before he had a chance to murder him for carelessly touching his girl. He wished he had spoken more clearly. She was only perplexed by his attempt to express his affection for her. She didn't even seem to believe what he was saying. He said to no one in particular, "Shit, do I really seem like the kind of asshole who'd joke about something like that?" He folded his arms and scoffed. "Ignore it. All I need to do is win so I can try again. No matter how direct I have to be, I don't care." He overheard someone ask, "So you like Yoshino-chan, right?" He gave a thoughtless, "Yeah," response. His face flushed and his eyes grew wide. He glared to his side, where the silly electric one and that shitty hair were waiting for him. What was the name of shitty hair? Kirishima. The redhead laughed and said, that's me. You finally remembered. Hey, what are you so angry about? When Katsuki didn't respond, he smiled and asked, so are you gonna ask her out anytime soon? He grinned and folded his arms. If you aren't, ya mind if I ask her? She's kind of my type. With a growl, Katsuki asked, what did you say? His anger and apparent disbelief perplexed Kirishima. When the silly blonde next to them put an arm around Katsuki's shoulders, the boy with the sharp teeth smiled and said, what? She's cute and really sweet. But she's also honest and tough. I like that in a girl. Plus she's surprisingly fiery and kinda cool. And she's got that pure maiden vibe to her. He hissed lowly, will you assholes shut up? Nana's mine. His cheeks burned with shame as the two smiled at him. He turned his head away. He slapped Kaminari's arm away and said, mind your own business. I'll do it on my own time, she's like a deer. If I'm too aggressive she'll probably just run off. He murmured. Change POV. As she watched Katsuki become enraged over his gold medal, which All Might had given him, Nanami sighed. He was upset. Nothing in her pouch could have prepared her for her amazing vines, and she had lost to the girl from Class 1B. After that, she knew she would have to rely on the other students to defeat Katsuki. She had given Shoto such fervent cheers. She had hoped that the dual-quirked boy would use his flames against Katsuki, and she was proud when Izuku was able to get him to do so. Unfortunately, when she applauded for his opponent, his anger seemed to flare, and Shoto was rendered unconscious by his howitzer impact. Her first reaction after the award ceremony was over was to look for support. As soon as she saw Shoto, she felt a surge of pride. She exclaimed, Shoto, with excitement. When Nanami threw herself at Shoto, she almost knocked him over with an embrace, forcing him to back off to avoid falling. I'm so proud of you. You used your flames. Shoto placed his hands on her waist and put her down. Midoriya said similar things to you. He said it with such intensity that I just forgot my father existed for a moment. He murmured. The fact appeared to embarrass him. Nanami gave an enthusiastic nod. I'll treat you to some soba. Let's go right now. He asked bewilderedly, why? I lost even though you were cheering so hard for me. Nanami cocked her head and scowled. That doesn't matter to me. I just want to celebrate your personal growth. She persisted. She took his hand and left the arena, asking, you like cold soba, right? Midnight was occupied with breaking free from Katsuki's numerous chains. It was time to get out now. Shoto gazed up at the heavens. Yeah, cold soba, served in a basket. When Nanami said, then we'll get some cold soba, she laughed. With a faint smile, Shoto followed her out of the arena. Nanami accelerated her pace as she vaguely heard Katsuki's muffled cries of rage. Shoto swallowed his mouthful of soba and said, so you lost a bet and you're avoiding the consequences. As Nanami picked at her largely completed meal, she complained, don't say it like that. She sighed, it's just, I don't think I can handle it. Shoto stared at her blankly as she shuffled. Instead of pulling her fringe, she started to clumsily stroke it with both hands. He wants me to confront my grandmother, she said. I can't do it. He made a clear accusation, saying, you agreed to the terms, though. With a wince, Nanami glanced down at her soba. She looked up at him, her body shaking as she said, I know, but what if it makes everything so much worse? When she looked up at Shoto, she was shocked by the serious expression on his face while he still had a mouthful of noodles hanging from his mouth. Grandmother, what if she doubles down? What if mom hears me and I ruin their relationship, she said. Shish Shoto. He wiped his mouth after swallowing his soba. Let's walk and talk. She hastily checked the price of their meal and stood up. Right. Taking hold of her hand, Shoto left the restaurant while gazing up at the sky. Nanami soon discovered that they were headed to the park. Shoto had requested a walk and a conversation, but he had remained silent until they had come to a bench. He sat down and said absently, you should do it. What? But, when she sat down, he nodded and patted the seat next to him, saying, Nanami, you shouldn't make bets if you have no intention of fulfilling them should you lose. He noticed a stray cat when he looked sideways. He put a hand down and was happy when it came to him right away. He knelt down and, although his face remained the same, his eyes seemed delighted as he scratched the joyful calico under the chin. In the end, you agreed to the terms. And I can't help but agree that you should confront her. Nanami gave the cat a gentle smile before reaching over to stroke it. When the amiable cat rubbed its body against their legs, she grinned and said, I guess, it's just that I can't really help but be afraid, you know. It's silly, right? I can face a villain, but I'm scared of my grandmother. The cat was picked up by Shoto and put on his lap. Villains are different. You don't really know them, so it's easier to confront them. It's different when it's someone you know. He glanced at her. You overthink everything and worry about what could go wrong, right? He said gently. She gave a nod of agreement. Your grandmother is no better than a villain, Nanami. If you want to be a hero, you'll have to confront her. Nanami let out a sigh. When the cat crawled into her lap, she chuckled and said, I hate when you make sense. When the cat pressed its nose against hers, she giggled once more, saying, Katsuki's mom said something similar. I don't get why you don't get along with him. You're quite similar. I can't tell if you are complimenting me or insulting me. He murmured. Would you like me to go with you to your house? He said. Nanami gave a headshake. She scowled and slapped her hands on her cheeks, startling the cat and making it flee. No, that's fine. Katsuki will most likely meet me there, or hunt me down. Whichever comes first, I'll do it, she said, looking up at him while grinning defeatedly. Thanks, Shokan, she said, blushing and covering her mouth when she saw his shocked look. Sorry, that was probably weird. Shoto gave a few blinks. Leaning close to her, he placed his hand on her shoulder. His closed eyes met Nanami's as she opened them. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, his nose lightly touched hers. As he withdrew, her cheeks turned a fiery red. His expression remained mostly the same, and his head tipped. You looked happy when that cat did it. So I thought maybe it would cheer you up. Was I wrong? He asked innocently. Nanami looked down, her lips quivering as she suppressed a laugh, and her blush deepened. PFF, haha, you really are like the ultimate big brother. She laughed. She smiled as she glanced up at him. I love you, Shoto. Shoto rubbed her head and gave a tiny smile. I'm glad you're feeling better. What the fuck? Change POV. At last, Katsuki had located Nana. He was aware that she was evading her end of the bargain when she fled with Todoroki. He had discovered the two sitting on a bench in the park. It looked like they had just kissed from where he stood. Her face flushed instantly after, as if to confirm it. Katsuki heard something she said to him, but he couldn't make out what it was. But he could clearly hear what she said next. I love you, Shoto. His chest twisted in a strange way. It infuriated him. What the fuck? He exclaimed out loud. The couple gave him a startled look in return. Nana ran to him after lighting up. She yelled, Katsuki, I'm ready. We can go now, as Katsuki took hold of her arm and dragged her behind him. He snarled, hey half and half, what the hell did you just do? Todoroki cocked his head, perplexed. With hesitation, he replied, I patted her head. As Katsuki struggled to contain his rage, his cheeks turned pink. Not that, bastard. Before that, did you seriously just kiss her in the middle of the goddamned park? The realization caused Todoroki's eyes to widen. He tapped his finger to his chin, seemingly trying to come up with a suitable explanation. I suppose that's what it looked like from your position, he said. He stated with firmness, it was a cat's kiss. It was entirely platonic. Even though he was in public, the blonde's anger had reached a boiling point, and he let out a number of loud explosions. Without altering his expression, the boy across from him said, the hell is that supposed to mean? A cat's kiss. It only served to enrage him more. He turned to face Nana again and winced at her obvious anger. Katsuki, he exclaimed, stop getting mad at all my friends. With a frown, he released her arm and gave her a menacing wrist flex. What were you doing kissing that bastard then? It wasn't an actual kiss, she said, placing her hands on his cheeks and drawing him down before swiftly releasing him. An Eskimo kiss. It was platonic like he said. Shoto is like a big brother to me. She glanced at him. The boy nodded, and Katsuki asked, right Shoto? She said irritably, anyway, that isn't important right now. Are we going to my house or not? Refusing to blush, Katsuki took her hand and bounded out of the park. He heard her hurriedly saying, bye, to Todoroki, but he chose to ignore it and concentrate on his own thoughts. What's the matter with me? Every time she talks to another guy, I feel like I'm going crazy. He thought angrily. Katsuki, get your act together. He heard her say, Katsuki, are you okay? You're being meaner than usual today. Are you still mad about how Shoto didn't use his fire against you? No, it wasn't just that. He was relieved that she no longer sounded angry with him, but he didn't turn to see her worried expression. In order to properly intertwine their fingers and walk alongside her, he slowed down and repositioned his grip on her hand. He was relieved that there weren't many people walking around because of the sports festival when he stopped at the crosswalk. "Nana," was his complaint. He resisted the uneasy giddy sensation in his chest as he felt her fingers tighten around his. He looked directly into the eye. "Once this shit with the old hag is over, go out with me. Once this shit with the old hag is over, go out with me." As Nanami and Katsuki walked hand in hand to her home, those words continued to play in her mind. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and her cheeks were flushed. Katsuki tensed at the nickname and gave her a suspicious look. "Kachan," he asked, "what did you mean when you asked me to go out with you?" "You meant as friends, right?" she said quietly. When she said, "It's a bad idea," he could sense her shaking. "You would get in all kinds of trouble if you dated me, you know. Like when we first met. That time with the..." Katsuki let out a sigh. This was the kind of response he had anticipated. "We're here." As she gazed at her home, her eyes grew wide. Was this two-story structure always this large? She couldn't help but feel insignificant as she gazed at her house. Katsuki squeezed her hand as she attempted to back away. She wasn't sure whether he was telling her that he wouldn't allow her to flee or if he was reassuring her. Both could very well be the case. A dry lump in her throat was swallowed. The greatest obstacle she would encounter would be on the other side of that door. This was superior to the League of Villains. She glanced at Katsuki, who gave her an excessively ferocious grin in return. She whimpered softly, "Kachan, I'm scared." "Why?" He raised an eyebrow in question. He smirked and cocked his head, saying, "I'm here." "Did you just quote All Might?" she inquired, surprised and raising her eyebrows. Katsuki glared at her as his face flushed. He yelled angrily, "What are you talking about?" "I did not. Don't say something so stupid." She rubbed her shoulder against his arm and chuckled a little. "Right, of course. Thanks, Kachan, I feel much better knowing you're here." He scratched at his brow, his cheeks warm. "Hey, when did I ever say you could call me that?" he murmured. She put her hand to her chin and narrowed her eyes. But I call all the people I care about some kind of nickname. Sometimes Kyoka is Kyochan, Toru is Hachan, and Shoto is Shokan. Though those are only sometimes. She mainly spoke to herself when she said, "Actually, I haven't gotten the green light for Shokan, I should talk to him about that." "Anyway, Izukun calls you Kachan, why can't I?" she teased, shaking her hands to get her attention back. He rubbed the back of his neck and turned away. "You're the only one who calls me Katsuki, that's why," he murmured. With a curious expression on her face, Nanami cocked her head. Her mouth dropped open to ask him. Sakura greeted the two as the door abruptly opened. She rolled back to give them space to be inside. "Look at that power couple. Nanami, you did great. Bakugo-kun, congrats on your win," she said. With a smile on her lips, she shut the door and rolled after them. "We recorded the whole thing for your father to watch when he gets home. Poor thing, guarding the sports festival so closely but he can't even watch it." She cracked a smile. Yeah," replied Nanami. Katsuki gave her a stern look and pushed her with his elbow. She whispered, Mom, where's grandmother? I need to speak to her." The older blonde gave an apologetic hand clap. She put her hand to her mouth to highlight her catty smile and said, "Oh, sorry. Mother was so proud of how far you'd gotten in the festival that she went out to buy a cake to celebrate. Shall I call her to buy some drinks as well? After all, your boyfriend won the whole thing. We should make it a party." The embarrassed woman squeaked out, "He isn't my boyfriend, Mom," and covered her face with her free hand. Sakura gave their hands a curious look but didn't bring up the subject. "Well, okay, but anyway, Mother will be home soon, so don't worry." "Good," complained Katsuki. To Sakura's surprise, he collapsed onto the couch, dragging Nanami beside him and placing his arm around her shoulder. He started, "Hey, Yoshino-san." The san appears to have been an afterthought. He cleared his throat and said, when Granny shows up, Nana has some important shit to say and you need to hear it." Sakura arched a disapproving eyebrow. Katsuki stiffened and turned away, saying, "You're pretty obscene. I hope Nanami doesn't notice that." With her eyes narrowed in agony, Nanami turned away and squeezed his hand, asking, "What's so important?" Her gaze expanded, rolling closer to them. She placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders and exclaimed, wait, no way. The woman's questioning gaze made the two teenagers tense. Nanami, you aren't pregnant, are you? Together, they exclaimed, what? Sakura's fists clenched as she turned to face Katsuki. She put her hands on her cheeks in horror and said, you're not here to ask for our blessing for marriage, because you knocked her up, are you, Bakugo-kun? Exclamation mark quote. And if we decline, you're gonna elope and move to America. And then you're going to continue trying to be heroes after the child is old enough. She hid her face. It would be an understatement to say that the two teenagers were furious. Without ever coming to visit until my grandchild turns 18 and wishes to meet his family in Japan even without your permission. The group heard someone say, Sakura, please stop watching those dramas. You're spouting nonsense. Nanami started tugging at her fringe as her blood turned cold. Without saying a word, Katsuki took her hand in his and took it out of her hair. He got to his feet and dragged her along with him. He growled, Nana, it's now or never. Mashiro's gaze grew strained. She held up a small white box with a cheerful smile and said, oh, it's Bakugo-kun. I brought a cake. Shall we celebrate your victory? He growled, we're going to celebrate, but not with you. As Nanami placed the cake on a nearby counter, her eyes narrowed in suspicion and then closed in another smile. Oh, she asked, what do you mean? Say it, Nana. Grandmother, she said, biting her lip as she turned to face her mother. Taking deep breaths, she gritted her teeth and turned to face her grandmother. She muttered to herself, there's a villain in front of you. Nanami's fists clenched, and a chilly glare took hold of her face. I want you to leave this house right now. When Mashiro gasped, excuse me. Sakura lectured, Nanami, that's no way to talk to your grandmother. But her tone was more shocked than stern. What has gotten into you? Nanami paused, looking at her friend. He gave her a nod while giving Mashiro a stern, uncompromising glare. Mashiro frowned and pursed her lips, asking, Grandmother, would you prefer that I tell Mom what you've done over the past 10 years, or do you want to do it yourself? Sakura scowled and turned to face her mother. Like how you would always pull my hair if I did something you didn't like. Or how you cut it and lied about me asking you to. She asked. Mother, what is she? Her grandmother snarled, Nanami, stop this nonsense. Don't you dare spout such lies. The woman narrowed her blue eyes in rage. The young blonde stepped back and positioned herself behind Katsuki. I'm not capable of doing this, she muttered. Katsuki gave a tongue click. He sighed, all right. How about I tell you what I know? He pushed his hand into his pockets and released hers. I know that your crazy ass has a nightmare quirk. Sakura's head cocked. She turned to face Mashiro and said, yes, she does, but she doesn't use it, of course. Right, mother. Mashiro averted her gaze and folded her arms. Why, yes, of course. He approached Mashiro with his head cocked upward to gaze down at the shorter woman, asking, ah. Is that so? Then how come just about a week ago Nana had run out of the house in her pajamas, barefoot, crying and terrified? Sakura's gaze expanded. Reaching Nanami, she placed her hands on her daughter's arms. Nanami, what happened? What is he talking about? Nanami's eyes pricked with tears as she saw Mashiro's angry face and Katsuki's back. Her smile was shaky as she looked down at her mother. Our grandmother used her nightmare quirk on me. It comes out in a dark purple mist like mine. And I saw one of the villains from the USJ incident at my school, she said. She tried to control her shaking as tears fell down her cheeks. I was so scared that my flight or flight response kicked in. I ran into Katsuki and, she said. That's why I tried so hard at the sports festival. Katsuki made a bet that if he won I'd have to confront grandmother for what she's been doing. She flushed her eyes. She paused and said, the last time she came to visit us, she prepared breakfast for us. Do you remember when I ran to the bathroom? When Katsuki's hand exploded, forcing Mashiro to back off, Mashiro attempted to move in the way. He ordered, you're gonna stay right there or else. She was actually frightened by the twisted grin on his face. What? Sakura turned shakily to face her mother, observing the terrified look on her face. Her eyes softened as she turned back to Nanami. What happened? Grandmother put soap in my food. I ran upstairs to throw up in my bathroom and it was all foamy. She raised her cheek. She separated from her mother and stood between Katsuki and Mashiro. And that gauze I told you was from a training accident. She slapped me, she said. From behind her, Katsuki grinned and stepped aside. She gave the elderly crone a fierce look. A purple smoke circled her as her quirk came to life. You've been torturing me with nightmares and physical abuse for 10 years, and I tolerated it because I know it's because of Mom's accident. I know because it was my fault. Does this smoke look familiar, grandmother? Mashiro gritted her teeth and her eyes grew wide. Yes, I suppose it looks similar to my own. The older woman retreated a step as Nanami approached her, her fist shaking. Maybe because I got it from you. This smoke is proof, she screamed. My quirk is a mutation. It mutated from your quirk. She sighed. She yelled angrily, so shouldn't you be as angry with yourself as you were with me? She cancelled her quirk as the smoke started to violently dance around her from her rapidly rising emotions. Every time I see you, you make me feel worthless because of my terrible quirk. There are days where I'd rather be quirkless because of you, she said. Mashiro frantically sought support from her appalled daughter. Sakura, you can't honestly believe what this ingrate is saying. I would never. Sakura whispered, don't call my daughter an ingrate. She's a good girl and a terrible liar, she said, rolling up to face her mother. My Nanami may be unlucky but she's no ingrate. And for the record, if she was about to be hit by a car again, I'd push her out of the way again. Have you been blaming her for what happened all these years? Exclamation mark. How dare you? Her hands were shaking with rage. As her wheelchair turned, she turned to face her daughter, her blue eyes full of tears. All these years, I just thought Nanami was shy because she doesn't see you so frequently. But this whole time she's been scared of you and I'm such a fool to have never noticed, she said. Nanami, please forgive me, please forgive this foolish woman. If I could get on my hands and knees I would. Nanami muttered, Mama. Her mom pivoted and gave Mashiro a fierce look. She made the demand, leave my house and avoid my family. Mashiro begged, what? You can't be serious, Sakura. Taking her daughter's face in her hands, she approached her. Stay away from your family. I am your family, dear. I'm your mother. Sakura took her hands away from her face and closed her eyes. She looked up at the older woman and said, my daughter is a hero in training. She's fought against villains and survived. She's training to deal with villains like you, mother. Now get out. Mashiro stepped back. Then she whimpered, Sakura. Her face twisted into a stern glare as she turned to face Nanami. She strode past Sakura and held up her hand, saying, you insolent child. This is all your fault. I won't forgive you for this. With a number of tiny explosions threateningly erupting from his hands, Katsuki dragged Nanami behind him. When he noticed that Mashiro's wrist was encircled by a thorny vine, his eyes widened. She let out a cry as the thorns sunk into her flesh and blood ran down her arm. Everyone was staring at Sakura. Her hand was glowing green and a pot that had held a rose had been knocked over not far from her. Sakura spoke slowly and icily, her blue eyes dark. Don't you dare touch my girl. This is your last chance, Mashiro-san. Get out before I have my husband come and remove you for trespassing. Mashiro's arm was violently twisted by the rose, which then slowly with warning withdrew. The two teenagers were separated by the elder. As she moved toward the door, she tenderly held her bleeding limb. Before leaving the house, she put on her shoes and gave her daughter one last look. Nanami instantly fell to her knees when she heard the door click. With haste, Katsuki knelt beside her and extended his hand. With caution, he asked, You all right, Nana? Nanami stood with his assistance, her knees trembling. She sniffed and wiped away a few tears. I'm fine. It's just, I think it took everything I had not to run away so. When she left, she said, glancing at her mother's grave face. Mom, I'm so sorry. She rushed to embrace her mother. I know you loved grandmother, I'm sorry. Sakura buried her face in her daughter's curly hair and gave her a tight hug. She placed her hands on Nanami's cheeks and kissed her forehead, saying, I'm so sorry, Nanami. You were giving me hints all this time and I didn't pay attention. I'm such a terrible mother, I should have looked closer. I'm so sorry, I'll listen to anything you wish to say to me. If you want to yell at me and tell me you hate me, go right on ahead. I deserve it all. Nanami shook her head with a gentle smile. She sighed and said, No, it's fine. I kept it from you. Change POV. As Nana and her mother had their time together, Katsuki stood around looking uncomfortable. He wasn't quite sure what to say or do now that the old crone was gone. With a frustrated ruffle of his hair, he walked out of the house. Later, Nana can respond to me. An outsider shouldn't likely be present for this. He pondered wearily. The sensation of two tiny hands clasping his made him tense. He raised an eyebrow as he turned back to Nana. What? Nana approached him with a gentle smile. Pressing her lips to his cheek, she leaned up onto her toes. His eyes grew wide, and he retreated a few paces. He put a hand to his cheek, his face flushed. Thanks, Katsuki. I owe you big time for this. She exhaled. With timidity, she rubbed the back of her neck. About your question earlier. He looked away, blushing, uncertain of how to respond. After putting his hands in his pockets and pausing for a moment, he turned to face her. Instead of responding, Katsuki pursed his lips and looked over her shoulder. You meant? He asked. She turned to face her mother, who was observing with a fixed interest. When Sakura realized she wasn't needed, her shoulders leapt. Oh, don't mind me, I'll just go fix this plant, she said, quickly wheeling away after picking up the flower pot. Before vanishing around the corner, she gave her child a quick glance. After giving her mother's antics a sheepish smile, Nana turned to look at Katsuki. He could feel his heart thumping in his ears. He had never heard of this before. But asking her out and waiting for a response were two entirely different kinds of stress. He wanted to snatch the small girl and press her body against his, but he also wanted to frantically blow something up. She repeated, "What did you mean by what you said?" Katsuki's eyes narrowed. He was trying to keep his cool, but his cheeks were unmistakably red. He pretended to be confident as usual and said, "What else could I mean, Freckles? I said go out with me. That means a date." When Nana's cheeks finally matched his in color, the silence between them was deafening. She glanced down at her shoes and grinned a little. Katsuki felt his stomach turn. Whether it was a positive feeling or not was unclear to him. Was it fear or hope? He was unable to tell. Her fringe was tucked behind her ear. Although it was a strange look, Katsuki didn't mind. At last, she parted her lips once more. She chuckled and said, "Dating me is a bad idea, ya know. I bring nothing but trouble and bad luck." What was so damn funny was lost on him. She looked up at him with those intense doe eyes and said, I shouldn't have a boyfriend, because I would cherish them so much that I'd be crushed if my quirk caused something awful to happen to them. So you're better off liking someone else." His chest hurt in a strange way. Was he just turned down? His heart pounded at the thought. This was all very strange. He felt as though a heavy weight had been placed on his chest. This feeling didn't sit well with him. He refused to accept it. He was upset. "Nana, don't fucking tell me that I'm better off liking someone else," he barked. She stepped back in surprise. He probably gave her a stronger hug than he needed to by grabbing her by the wrist and drawing her into his chest. He scowled as he buried his face in her untidy hair and said, "There's no one else like you. That's why he complained, "the one I like." He felt her put her arms around his back after a few seconds. He raised his face away from her hair and gazed at the top of it, saying, "Shit, I feel like a fucking loser. Do you like me or not, Nana? And don't avoid the question." Her response was a hushed, "I can't." Katsuki stiffened. He scowled down at her, a mark of irk growing on his head. He demanded, "You can't like me. What the hell, why not?" "No," she said, taking her arms off his back and pushing with her hands on his chest. "I can't breathe." His eyes grew wide with insight. He released his hold long enough for her to gaze up at him, saying, "Oh, shit, right." Nana appeared to pout up at him as she huffed and raised her chin to rest on his chest. Her cheeks were a gentle shade of pink as she smiled slightly and said, "Geez, you're so inconsiderate sometimes, Katsuki. Violent and selfish, arrogant too. You get jealous for no reason all the time. You're also mean to people for no reason, ow." Katsuki pinched her nose and she yelled, "Shut up, I get it already. Get to the point," he yelled. Despite the tears that pricked out of her eyes, Nana giggled while holding her nose. She laughed and said, "Geez, can't take a joke, can you?" She grinned more. "Despite all that, I still like you, Katsuki." When Katsuki pulled her to his chest to hide his flaming face from her, she yelled. However, he appeared to be unaware that he was only exposing her to his fast-thumping heart. "Fucking hell, you could have just said that, Nana." He was grumbling. He glanced down at her as he sensed her shift. She knitted her eyebrows together in concern. "Are you sure you want me? I don't have many redeeming qualities." Katsuki frowned and stooped. Before pushing her away at arm's length, he briefly kissed her cheek and said, "If you didn't have redeeming qualities, I wouldn't like you. Use your head a little more, damn." He shielded his face with his hand and averted her admiring eyes, saying, "That's enough for now." Even though he was aware that his blush was visible, he tried. He walked over to the door and grasped the knob, saying, "I'm not a complete asshole. I'll give you some time to recover from all this bullshit with your grandmother. But then I'm gonna take you out. That sound good?" As she tried to understand what he was saying, Nana's hand was on her cheek. "Why, yeah, of course." "Good." Without looking at her, he opened the door. He shut the door behind him and proceeded down the sidewalk, saying, "By the way, since you're mine now, don't think I'll let you go so easily." As he smiled, his hands twitched with the urge to explode and he struggled to contain his blush. Shit, what comes after this? Nanami tripped over Mio and staggered down the stairs, yelping. She landed upside down with her legs over her head. With a loud groan, she looked up to see her mother's worried expression. Sakura rolled back as she went to assist her daughter in getting up, saying, "Oh, my poor girl." The young girl was dusted off and examined for bruises. "Nanami, are you all right?" she asked. "You know better than to rush down the stairs," she murmured. Nanami nodded and gave a sheepish smile. She laughed and said, "Yeah, I know, I just wanted to get a head start." She walked with a slight limp at her mother's side. "Did Dad make breakfast before he left or should I buy something on the way?" Sakura held up a blue bento box and a 1,000 yen note with a slight smile. She kissed her mother's cheek and grinned, saying, "He had to leave because he woke up late, but I made your lunch last night. If you leave now, you should be able to buy a snack on your way." Sakura bit her lip as Nanami sat on the floor and started putting on her shoes. "Nanami," she smiled sorrowfully as she met her daughter's honey brown eyes. She placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder and said, "I know I've said it over and over, but I'm so sorry for allowing what Mashiro had been doing to happen. Just don't hide from me anymore. You shouldn't have ever felt worried about me and my mother's relationship. If you ever want to be selfish, you should go ahead and do it." She grinned softly. "You deserve that much." Nanami was so embarrassed that her cheeks turned pink. After adjusting her shoe, she got to her feet. She said, "Yeah, thanks, Mom. I love you," and left for school. As Sakura watched her daughter go, she let out a sigh. As she shut the door, her eyes grew softer. "You're too forgiving for your own good, my dear girl," she said, glancing down at her wheelchair. "Have you been feeling this way the entire time? How can I ever make you feel better about what happened?" Izuku walked to school with a sigh. He reviewed all of his correspondence with Nanami. Despite having read them, she had never replied. Was she all right? He had met her grandmother at the train station after the sports festival. The woman appeared completely enraged, but she also appeared completely defeated and vindictive. He had been worried about it. For his beloved best friend, not for the elderly woman. "I don't even know where she lives, if I may claim to be her best friend." Anxiously, he ruffled his hair. His eyes wandered up and he saw the person occupying his mind. "God, that bad feeling I had when I first saw her grandmother has been killing me, and she refuses to answer me." "Nanami," he exclaims. The boy with freckles ran toward her without much thought. Izuku almost threw her in an embrace, but Nanami turned around and yelled. She put her arms around him and laughed. "What's this? A rare Izukun hug?" she asked in a humorous manner, but it was difficult to ignore the bewilderment in her voice. He turned her in a circle and was relieved to hear her laughing once more. "Thank goodness you're okay," he said. He placed his hands on her shoulders and put her down. "I was so worried about you. I saw your grandmother a few days ago and she was so angry that I couldn't help but be scared she had done something to you. As soon as I saw her I had terrible vibes, and I wish I could have done something that exact day." He started looking at her head and arms. "You're not hurt or anything, are you? Would you like to see Recovery Girl? We can go now." He paused when he felt her manipulating his hair. He tilted his head, his gaze fixed on her. She grinned. She bounced her hand playfully off his hair and said, "Everything is all right. Grandmother is no longer a problem. There's nothing to worry about, I promise you." She laughed and walked past him, saying, "Geez, you better be more careful, Izukun. Get any more worried and I might think you like me." With a clumsy smile, Izukun jogged a few paces behind her. In confirmation, he heard her hum. "You're really okay. That's all that matters then." Nanami gave him a smile. She chuckled and said, "You really do see me as a little sister." Izuku recoiled in embarrassment and hid his face. Nanami waved her hand frantically to dispel the tension as her eyes widened. She looked ahead and her smile widened. Oh sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. Believe me, I'm over it. I'll see you in class. Izuku saw Nanami dash forward to overtake Kachan. When the normally angry blonde put his hand on her head and greeted her calmly, he grinned a little. I didn't realize how close Kachan and Nanami were. He smiled wearily as he observed the two. Things would be lovely if he treated everyone even half as well as he treated her. His thoughts abruptly stopped, his cheeks turned pink, and his eyes grew wide. When Kachan bent down, it seemed as though he had planted a kiss on the small blonde's cheek, but her disheveled hair partially covered up the action. Izuku quickly elbowed Nanami's arm after noticing that he was tense, which caused the explosive blonde to smile maliciously. Izuku looked away awkwardly and shook his head. I thought I saw Kachan. No, I'm fairly certain that romance is unimportant to Kachan. Instead, he must have whispered something. Yes, that's more likely. To be honest, the freckled boy had never considered the possibility that he liked Nanami, even though he knew his childhood friend did. Uraraka's voice made Izuku wince. Wow, they sure have gotten close, haven't they, Deku-kun? With a hand on her chin, the brunette was observing from behind him. What an interesting pair. Change POV. Holding her cheek where Katsuki had kissed her, Nanami smiled softly. She said, "You're surprisingly affectionate, Katsuki." He scoffed and flushed. He looked at her and gave her a playful forehead flick, saying, "No, I'm not." Her cheek puffed out. "Anyway, we're going to find out what agencies want us today." He laughed. "Bet all the best heroes are gonna be lining up for me." Nanami gave an eye roll. "Your arrogance is showing." Katsuki frowned and his eyebrows fluttered. He grinned and raised his nose in the air, asking, "And so what if it is?" He grinned at the flush that spread across her face, saying, "Last time I checked, that's one of the things you like about me, freckles." She puffed out her cheek and twirled her fringe around her finger. "Yeah, it is. You seem to like pointing that out." As her blush extended to her ears, his eyes brightened with mild amusement. "What, that you like me?" he asked. "Maybe you should say it again, huh?" She covered her face and let out a squeal. "Geez, I had no idea you were such a tease." The freckled girl left an amused Katsuki behind and hurried off towards their class. Nanami unavoidably collided with a considerably taller creature as she rushed through the corridors. Before she could fall, a hand caught her wrist and hauled her to her feet. The young blonde held on to her nose and looked up into sunken eyes that she recognized. "Yoshino Shoju, you shouldn't run in the halls, you could have gotten hurt." When she saw Toshinori wearing a yellow suit that was much too large for him, her eyes widened. The train station Ojisan. With the title she had given him, Toshinori flinched visibly. She bowed and took a quick step back. "I'm so sorry for bumping into you," she said, smiling as she got to her feet. Unquestionably, she was thrilled to see the man who had saved her life again. "You remember me?" He folded his arms and said, "Why yes, you left quite the impression on me." He patted her head and said, "So you got into UA after all, huh? I thought you would. I saw you at the sports festival, you were quite a sight to behold. It's too bad you didn't place higher." Nanami rubbed the back of her neck and gave an unsteady nod. She tensed up and gazed up at him, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Yeah, honestly, I had personal reasons for trying so hard, but it all worked out in the end. Actually, Oji-san, if you're here, does this mean that the teaching job you told me about was at UA? If you're teaching here, you must have been a hero. Are you retired and here to share your wisdom? What was your hero name?" She wanted to know. Startled by her zeal, Toshinori stepped back. He chuckled uncomfortably. No, just regular staff. I teach, general studies." He grinned. He tensed when he saw Nanami putting her head against the wall in desperation. "Anyway, I heard you hero course students will be getting picked for internships soon. Are you excited?" he asked. "I take that as a no." "No, I am, but I'm worried that I won't get picked by anyone. I did a good job, but my power is misfortune. What agency wants to bring a bad luck charm to their practice?" She looked at her hand. She squatted on the floor and moaned, "Especially when my power leaks out sometimes without my control. It'd be a disaster. Plus I'm shy around strangers. My classmates are one thing, but being in front of a pro hero, working with the public. Honestly, I'd freeze up. I would be an embarrassment." Toshinori's head cocked. "You still have those confidence issues, I see. Young lady, you have great instincts and a sharp mind. I've heard how All Might talks about you." Nanami gave him a look in return. All Might does. Yes, he often talks about how you push yourself and how quick-witted you are. Not only that, you seem to be able to trust all the right people. You just need to be able to believe in yourself like you do others. That, my girl, is key to being a great hero. He sighed. Nanami's eyes were full of wonder as she gazed up at the tall man. As the girl appeared to examine him, Toshinori tensed, saying, Oja-san, you sound just like All Might. Her honey brown eyes met his blue ones. He calls Meshuho. Like you too, and he says such inspiring things like that all the time. It was like I was talking to him. He has a yellow suit like that too. Well that is, of course. She gave a small smile. Oja-san, you're a big All Might fan, aren't you? Maybe even more than Izukun. She chuckled. Going as far to talk like him, you're on another level. Toshinori laughed a little and exhaled deeply in relief. He extended his hand to her and raised her up when she accepted it, saying, yeah, you caught me. I guess his mannerisms wore off on me. Run along now, Yoshino Shoju. You'll be late to class at this rate. Oh right. She bowed to him after dusting off her skirt. Thank you, Oja-san. I enjoyed our talk. She scurried away, and Toshinori sighed as he watched. That girl may have an overly keen sense of intuition. I thought she was on me for a moment. Nanami gazed awkwardly at the blank board that was handed to her. She sighed and leaned her head against the board, saying, a hero name. With nausea rising in her belly, she briefly scrawled the name, Lucky, before quickly deleting it. I thought it would be a bit much to use that name. What can I do? In her mind, she heard Uraraka say, Uravity. She sighed, this is hard. She noticed that Iida had adopted his name, Shoto, when she looked up. The expression in the boy's eyes made her frown. It was uncomfortable, but it wasn't the right moment to inquire. She turned to face Katsuki, who appeared to be having trouble thinking of a new moniker. Midnight cheerfully called, we got Bakugo, Midoriya, and Yoshino left. Are either of you ready? A hush fell as Midoriya approached the front. Nanami looked up and then down. She stopped writing and raised her head once more. I used to hate it, but a certain someone changed the meaning of the word for me. My whole world was expanded and it made me happy, he laughed. My hero name will be Deku. Nanami grinned broadly as her eyes grew wide. She hesitated, casting a wary glance at Katsuki, who appeared more than annoyed by Izuku's announcement. She wiped out her writing and shook her head. All right then, Bakugo, Yoshino, or either of you. Nanami rose to her feet, her cheeks flushed. She said, may I go next, Midnight Sensei? As she made her way to the podium, Midnight grinned slightly and moved aside. My quirk is called Misfortune, and it came from someone I'm not fond of, she murmured. She looked at Midnight, who grinned and nodded encouragingly. But I was thinking that in order to have good luck, you'll need bad luck to even the field. So my name is 2 in 1, kind of, she said. With a gulp, Nanami carefully flipped her board. The superstitious hero. Misfortune. Midnight clapped her hands and grinned. Ah, that's lovely. It's a pun on your quirk and it has such nice intentions behind it. I love it. With a sigh of relief, Nanami hurried to her chair. Her cheeks were warm with pleasure as she sat down. As Katsuki continued writing on his board, she turned to watch his reaction and was pleased to see a small smirk on his lips. Iida-kun, called Nanami. As their class had time to choose their internship, she scooted closer to the tall student. Are you okay? He replied rapidly, oh, yes, I'm fine, Yoshino-kun. Nanami gazed at him with skepticism. The boy stiffened and arched an eyebrow, saying, I know the look in your eye. She glanced at her list of potential internships as her eyes grew softer. She observed the boy's eyes narrow and said, I had a similar expression when I first got the news that my mom couldn't walk anymore. She cleared her throat, saying, I won't say I can relate, but I heard Ingenium was forced to retire because of. You're my friend. If you ever want to talk about it, I'm always ready to lend an ear. She said. Iida gave a small smile. He gestured to her list and said, Midoriya-kun said something similar. But I assure you, all is well. Have you any idea about where you'll be interning? The seamless transition made her tense, and she frowned as she studied the list. I don't know. I didn't get any offers just as I expected. She murmured. She looked up at him and said, it would be kind of awkward if I just walked in where I wasn't supposed to. I'm worried I'd be imposing. Iida raised a saluting hand, his glasses reflecting the light above them. Nonsense. You're a hard worker, you'll do a good job wherever you go. She nodded and gave a small smile. That's pretty high praise. Thanks, Iida-kun. The girl said, "Hey, Nanami," and winced as she was abruptly pulled from her conversation. Before long, she was surrounded by female pupils. Ashido enthusiastically pumped her fists. "Hey, word on the street is you and Bakugo have gotten really close. Are you two dating?" She flushed instantly. No we aren't." She snapped back in response. That was the correct response, wasn't it? After all, we haven't gone on a date yet. Does Katsuki wish for us to be known? I should ask him. Doubtfully, she asked herself. Like the other girls, she watched Hagakure falter with disappointment. "Ah, really? Here I thought you were. Is there anyone you're interested in?" "Interested in? I was actually having a rather important conversation with Iida-kun, so, wait, what's with the questions?" She said awkwardly. She played with her fringe, but she deliberately avoided pulling it. Jiro wrapped her finger around her earphone jack. "Ah, well, you just seemed like you're into someone, so we were wondering. These last few days you were all tense and then all of a sudden you seemed insanely happy, so we figured." Awkwardly, the young blonde rubbed the back of her head. "Grandmother was gone, so I guess I must have been acting weirdly." She grinned and shook her head. "Well, something good at home happened is all."
Uraraka sulked. "Well, that's good and all, but is there anyone in the class you like?" she inquired.
Ashido exclaimed excitedly.
Ooh. Wait, instead we should ask who you think is the cutest." The feeling of eyes on their small group made Nanami tense. The pinkette laughed and said, "I think Todoroki is the most handsome, but who here doesn't?"
Suyu put her hand on her chin and cocked her head. "Well, I suppose everyone has their preferences. Cute and handsome are different, aren't they?" Yaoyorozu firmly placed her hands on her hips. "We really shouldn't be pressuring Nanami-chan like this. You all know how shy she can be, we might be making her uncomfortable." Despite appreciating the tallest girl's effort, the youngest female shook her head. Taking in her surroundings, she asked herself, "It's fine. Let's see, the cutest. That's to say, it doesn't have to be the one you're romantically interested in, by the way." Uraraka responded. After looking around the room and nodding, Nanami folded her arms and smiled. "All right," she said softly, "I have my answer." The girls listened, leaning closer. She pointed to the red-haired boy who was talking in the corner and said, "The one I find to be the cutest is." The girls were silent as they listened to her say, "Kirishima-kun." Evidently, they didn't anticipate her saying that. "Personally, I think he's absolutely adorable. I like his long lashes and his pointy teeth are especially cute. He reminds me of a cat, and his obsession with manliness is rather charming, isn't it?" The sharp-toothed boy caught the attention of all the girls. With varying expressions of agreement, they glanced at Nanami and then at one another. Ashido laughed and said, "I can see where you're coming from." Their conversation was overheard by a certain Lord Explosion Murder, who appeared dissatisfied with her response. Nearer the edge of the school lines, Nanami leaned on the roots of a tree and hummed. The engine-quirked boy had made it plain that he didn't want company for lunch today, so she had planned to talk to Iida more. She opened the bento her mother had made for her inside. Some of her favorite foods were included. Her gaze grew softer. "Mom is attempting to make amends, I suppose." She closed her eyes and thought about Iida again. "I'm really concerned. I wish I could connect with people more like Izukun. Perhaps I should just let him handle Iida. He can probably assist him." She sighed in thought. When a rolled egg was taken out of her box, she was taken aback and turned to see Katsuki. He said, "Hey, Nana." With a frown on his face, he took a seat beside her. He was obviously in a bad mood. She laughed and said, "If you wanted some, you could have asked." When he shrugged, she rolled her eyes. "So that shitty hair is cuter than me, huh?" Nanami looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't help but smile as he nodded shamelessly, asking, "Were you eavesdropping?" After cutting off a piece of hamburg, she offered it to him and said, "I think Kirishima-kun is the cutest, yes, but I still prefer you, Katsuki. You're two different kinds of cute, don't be so jealous." He scoffed and put the meat in his mouth. Unaffected by his obscene remark, the girl laughed and said, "Don't be stupid. I'm not jealous." With a groan, the boy wrapped his arm around her shoulder and drew her in. "Fine, that asshole can be the cutest, but don't give him all your attention," he grumbled. She smiled uncontrollably as she leaned against his shoulder. To be honest, it was difficult not to find his jealousy endearing.
She let out a quiet sigh and carried on eating. With a grunt, Katsuki switched places and lifted her. She yelled as he abruptly positioned her between his legs, his head resting on her shoulder and his arms encircling her waist. Katsuki, she questioned shyly. He whispered, "Shut up, I'm tired." Nanami gave him a small smile before reaching up and running her fingers through his hair. Katsuki's body tensing up against hers caused her to pause. "You'd think you'd change the way to talk to your," at last she said. "Ah, what are we?" Nanami winced as he raised his head and his teeth touched her shoulder through her blazer. The bite was more like timid chewing than anything else. She assumed this was just his awkward way of showing affection because it didn't hurt. Or simply a means of preventing himself from saying something foolish. He muttered, "RL friend," through the cloth. "Huh?" she inquired. With red cheeks, he scowled as he raised his head to look at her. He tensed at her wide eyes and turned his head away, resting his head on her shoulder once more. "I said you're my damn girlfriend," he exclaimed. He muttered, "Shit no, I mean," Katsuki let out a growl of frustration that made her shoulder tremble. He became a little more at ease when he heard her laugh. "I want you to be my girlfriend, alright. Damn, I wish you didn't have to pull everything out of me like that." With a gentle smile, Nanami handed him a spoonful of fried rice over her shoulder. He turned his head and took the spoon in his mouth after a moment. She kissed his cheek in the middle of chewing, and he turned red. "All right, that makes you my." Nanami's face burst into red smoke with a puff. She appeared to have just put it on. She covered her face with one hand and squeaked, "Am my BB boyfriend." Oh wow, it all just hit me at once." Katsuki's eyes grew wide, then squinted suspiciously. "What just hit you?" She shifted slightly so she could see his face more clearly. She buried her face in his shoulder and said, that you like me." She grinned and looked up at him, saying, "I kind of thought it was a really long prank." When Katsuki pinched her nose, she yelled, "Even though you're not that much of an ass." She half laughed and said, "Gah ow." After letting go and scoffing, he put his arm around her and gave her a half hug. His cheeks were flushed from frustration. "I never say shit I don't mean. I said I like you and I meant it. Why is it so hard to comprehend? Do I really seem like someone who'd joke about this shit?" Instead of responding, she bit into some fried rice and hamburg. As she deliberated over her response, his eyebrow arched. She glanced up at him after swallowing her meal. Once more, the small girl pressed herself against his cheek without responding. Katsuki's cheek developed an irk mark. He made his newly appointed girlfriend laugh when he yelled, "Stop trolling me, damn it. I'm sorry. Everyone says I should be more confident, but it's hard to imagine someone as amazing as you could like someone as not very amazing as me." Katsuki gazed at her expressionlessly. He took an egg from her lunch after taking a look at it. He inquired, "Nana, where is your favorite spot?" She glanced at her bento box and blinked. She looked at him and winced at the irritated look on his face. "I like the soba restaurant Shoto and I go to," she said. He grunted, confirming her suspicions, "but I have a feeling you wouldn't want to go there." She gazed up at the sky while humming. I don't have a favorite place. I don't really think about those things." He clicked his teeth, and she heard it. He sighed, "Goddamn," he started to think, ruffling his hair. "Guess I'll figure that out. Nana, we're going on a date before the internship starts." He was grumbling. She uttered the words, okay. With timidity. After a few moments of staring at her ashamed face, he placed his hand on the back of her head and pressed it against his chest. Oh no, what sort of date would please her? Sitting on the floor in front of her mother, who was attempting to comb her hair while seated on the couch, Nanami let out a yelp. As Sakura attempted to carefully remove her comb from her daughter's thick and unruly mop, she muttered an apology. "Nanami, I thought you told me you've been combing your hair properly." She sighed after releasing the comb at last. "It's all knotted up," she offered as a half reprimand. "I mean I have, but it just, when I sleep I move a lot and it gets all tangled and sometimes I'm in a rush to go to school." Nanami gasped. She fumbled clumsily with her fringe. Katsuki could take me on a date at any time, I wanna be prepared and look nice." In response, her mother hummed. She sighed as her daughter nodded beneath her hand, and she said, "I suppose I can understand, you want to look cute for your new boyfriend. Alright, I'll try to get these knots out, but I can't promise anything else." She exhaled. With a small smile, she started to untangle her daughter's hair. When Nanami stiffened, she laughed and asked, You haven't told your father, have you? She tipped her head up to gaze wistfully at the ceiling and said, it's okay. He'll probably panic at how quickly you're growing up. Next thing you know you'll be kissing in his room, and then you'll get in the heat of the moment and then you end up pregnant, then you get married and go to America. Mom, we've been through this. No more novellas. But the novellas give me life. Mom. Nanami ran a finger through her curls and hummed. She had to take a second shower to revitalize her hair after it had become poofed from constant combing, which implied. As she ran, she screamed, excuse me please, I'm gonna be late. Technically, I left about 30 minutes early, but I doubt I'll be on time. She protected herself from a car splash with an umbrella. I won't fall for that again, she said with a valiant laugh. She then trodden on a dog's tail. Yup, Nanami said with a long, heavy sigh, and took off running. Change POV. Katsuki was eager to start school after he brushed his teeth and ate his breakfast with even more vigor. But there was still a heavy burden on his mind. Perhaps I should have looked into her preferences before taking her out. His mind wandered when he watched his father bid his mother farewell with a kiss just before he left for work. With a frustrated grunt, Katsuki approached the brunette. He said, hey old man, first. He chuckled nonchalantly, that's not my name, Katsuki. As he put on his jacket, he turned to face his son. What's up? With a suspicious glance at his preoccupied mother, Katsuki hurriedly shoved his father out the door. He closed it behind him and gave Masaru an uncomfortable look. He said in a low voice, your first date with the mom, what did you do? Masaru cocked his head in interest. Katsuki rubbed the back of his neck, clenched his teeth, and turned his head away. I told Nana I would take her out on a date. But I don't actually know where to take her. Masaru smiled as his eyes grew wide. Your first date. Katsuki's covering of his mouth amused him. But when Mitsuki opened the door and almost tore it from the frame, the effort was in vain. You finally stopped being a wuss and asked Nanami-chan out. As Nanami walked into the classroom, she picked a leaf out of her hair. Stupid dog, at least I didn't get stuck in the tree for long, she murmured. She waited for homeroom to start, greeting her friends at the door and sitting on Kyoka's desk. Kyoka called in a slightly playful manner, hey, you're early for a change. She took a leaf from Nanami's hair once more. You got chased up a tree again, didn't you? The blonde gave a nod. Toru selected a feather from her hair and held it up in a questioning manner. Nanami gazed at it, then looked away. As the younger blonde complained, I also got attacked by a pigeon when I got too close to its nest, but we won't talk about that. She grinned a little as the girls laughed. She looked in the direction of Katsuki's seat at the far end of the room. For some reason, he appeared worn out. He didn't look at her, and she turned away, her cheeks flushed. I wanna go shopping, for, like, a dress or something. I was hoping you guys would come with me. What? Nanami squealed in surprise as two pink hands appeared on her shoulders out of nowhere. Ashido asked excitedly, Nanami-chan, I thought you didn't like skirts and stuff like that. Nanami looked down at her lap and flushed. She looked in Katsuki's general direction before settling back into her lap. I just wanna try looking cuter. I've only worn school skirts or simple ones that don't catch a lot of attention but, she confessed. She put both hands over her now red face and said, I thought it'd be nice to wear a dress in case, I just wanna try being cute for a change. Oh my god, you're so precious. Ashido exclaimed, slapping the little girl in her palm. The horned girl paused and said, let me come with you, I'll get you a dress perfect for any occasion. Hey, Nanami-chan, have you decided where you're going? She inquired. Nanami raised an eyebrow and hummed thoughtfully, I was thinking of asking Snipe-sensei. Guns and slingshots aren't the same but getting tips from him could be good. But he's not even on the list, she gave a dry chuckle. She looked at her list again and scratched her head. Quote. Izuku walked over to the little cluster of girls and placed a hand on his chin thoughtfully. I don't know about that idea. Snipe-sensei's quirk allows whatever projectile he throws to hit with perfect precision. I'm not sure he would be much help, he exhaled. Iida gave Nanami an unappreciated reprimand when she pulled up her knees and gave them a hug, causing her shoulders to slump. I knew this would happen. No one wants a walking bad luck charm. She sighed. With great enthusiasm, Kyoka said, hey, don't say that. She prodded her friend's cheek and said, why don't you intern with me at Death Arms Agency? When Nanami shook her head, she smiled languidly and said, You know, we're pretty similar. You don't have a second hearing quirk, do you? Well, maybe you should investigate that. I've always wondered why you were able to tell Ochako was coming before she even left the floor on our second day of school. Poking her fingers together, Nanami flushed. I mean, it's possible, but my hearing is nothing compared to yours or my dad. Not even my aunt's. Aunt, oh she touched her cheeks. My aunt is a pro hero. She's actually my dad's younger cousin. I considered going to her agency, but it's an aquatic agency and I'm not a strong swimmer. She sighed and closed her eyes. I'll figure it out. Ashido took Nanami to a store where she browsed the numerous dresses on display. In fact, she seemed to have been dragged there. A red dress was held to the shorter girl's body by the girl with the pink skin. Nanami shook her head and flushed bright pink. The hue was far too striking. Behind her head, Ashido placed her hands. Maybe you'd look better in soft, pastel colors. She laughed. She looked around and smiled. Like that, she said, pulling her moaning companion across the store. She grabbed the desired dress from the rack and placed it against Nanami's chest. This is perfect. Wear it casually or wear it for a date. The color suits you, too. When Nanami was pulled in front of the mirror, she gave a small smile. Does it? She whispered. Ashido, who once again insisted that the girl have more confidence, lit up and gave her a hug. She took out her phone after sensing a faint vibration in her pocket. Her friend nodded and rushed to get more clothes. Just a sec, Ashido-chan. She appeared to be more thrilled than Nanami. Hell. We're going to the aquarium tomorrow, Freckles. Katsuki's frantic voice on the other end of the phone made her jump. Then a movie, and I dunno, whatever you wanna do after. Give her a damn second to respond if that's what she wants to do first, y'all little shit. Mitsuki's familiar smacking sound interrupted Nanami's response. Katsuki's somewhat rambling reply to his mother made Nanami chuckle. That sounds fun but kinda expensive. I'll buy my ticket, okay. Instantly, Katsuki said, no, it's fine, I can cover it. It's my idea so I'll cover it. The sheer panic she heard in his voice made her smile. He obviously wanted to make sure he could make it a day she would enjoy, and it was adorable. Nanami paused and said, MK, that sounds nice. I'll just try to smuggle in some of my own money. Don't even try to secretly pay for anything. She looked at her phone in wonder and flushed. She was certain she hadn't spoken that aloud. Not even the snacks. No Nana, I'm paying for the whole thing. She exclaimed as she heard what was probably his palm crackling. She gave a small laugh. Meet me there, okay. I'll give you something nice when we meet up. Ooh, something nice, he says. Nanami-chan, call me if he tries to get frisky. Almost immediately after that, the call ended. Shut up you hag, holy she. Before looking at the dress Ashido had chosen for her, Nanami looked down at her phone. As the Pinkett returned wearing shoes she vowed would be comfortable for long walks, a smile appeared on her lips. Tomorrow, Nanami would put that theory to the test. As she braided her fringe and secured it behind her hair with a black scrunchie, Nanami hummed. She looked at herself in the mirror and grinned. Ashido had selected a dress with a sky blue, fluttery, lacy skirt and a black top. Nanami wore her black tights underneath, as she usually did. She looked back to make sure nothing was amiss, and when she saw nothing, she smiled with excitement. She looked at her cat, who was sleeping languidly on her bed, and said, all right, Mio. As if on cue, the cat meowed at her and opened one eye before idly rolling onto his side and saying, wish me luck. After grabbing her backpack, she left the house. I packed a ton of safety gear in my backpack. My bad luck won't ruin our first date. I'll securely lock it up. She was determined to think. After stuffing an umbrella into her backpack, she hurried down the stairs with caution. I'm going now, she said, giving Sakura a cheek kiss and giving Hajime a hug. When he saw her all gussied up, her father appeared quite surprised. Look at you, all cute today. That has to be the girliest thing I've ever seen you in. He cracked a joke. What's the occasion? Nanami stiffened and chuckled uncomfortably. Why yeah, I just thought I'd look cute today. No other reason. I'm gonna go now, she exclaimed as she hurried out the door putting on her blue and black flats. Hajime blinked and glanced back at his wife, who instantly returned her focus to the TV. Change POV. Katsuki frowned while examining the various hair clips on exhibit. He was in a purportedly unisex clothes and cosmetics store, but in an embarrassingly feminine area. Why had he promised to give Nana a nice gift once more? Because, apparently, He was a fucking idiot. The typically angry blonde had very little experience with gift giving. Katsuki stiffened at the sound of Kirishima's voice. Hey, Bakugo, what are you doing in this store? Don't tell me you gel your hair too. His brow shifted. The fuck? No, my hair looks like this all the time. And mind your own business. He yelled. His gaze returned to the clips in his hair. He narrowed his eyes and his cheeks turned pink. I can't show up without anything, but I have to leave soon. I'm not lying at all. Angrily, he thought. Kirishima's arms were folded. Yeah, I come here a lot. The store's not my style, but they got some good prices on the hair products I use. He picked up a hair stick with pale blue pearls hanging off silver links and dark blue flowers on top and said, Shut up, hair for brains, I'm trying to think. With a scowl, he turned it, pulling on the fabric and looking at the redhead who had not stopped talking. He said irritably, Hey, how does this look? Kirishima looked at it, tilting his head. He scratched his cheek and arched an eyebrow. I mean, it has a nice contrast against your hair color, I guess. It doesn't really look like it's your style though, Bakugo. Katsuki gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to blow up the redhead in front of him. He sneered and approached the clerk, saying, It's not for me, dumbass. He complained, I'll take this. He rubbed his temples as he hurried out of the store after paying the absurd price and getting the small blue gift bag the clerk had placed it in. Now that he was headed to the aquarium, he became aware that Kirishima was pursuing him. Where you headed, Bakugro? Katsuki scowled behind him. Don't call me that. I'm going to the aquarium now, piss off. Kirishima glowed. The aquarium? You didn't strike me as the leisurely type. Mind if I tag along? He replied enthusiastically. He growled, Yes, I fucking mind. Go away. He sped up as he said, I have plans today, I don't have time for your bullshit. In an attempt to get rid of his dim-witted classmate, after giving the bag a quick glance and frowning, he shoved it into his pocket, taking care not to crush its contents. The sensation of Kirishima putting an arm around his shoulder made him stiffen. What are you doing? He smiled and went ahead of him, saying, Come on Bakugo, let me tag along. I wanna see the sharks. It'll be fun, we really oughta hang out more. Trying to keep his temper in check, Katsuki was flushed. I will not arrive angry. I'm not going to arrive angry. He gave his temples a massage. Nana is going to have a good day. This will not be ruined by that shithead. He let out a breath and passed Kirishima. He made a subtle hint, saying, I don't care if you come, but you better not bother me or Nana. The redhead's gaze brightened. Yoshino-chan is joining you. Sweet, maybe I should invite the others. Let's make this a group thing. Katsuki's hand exploded in multiple ways. What? Absolutely not. What the fuck is wrong with you? Take the hint, Kirishima. With mild surprise, Kirishima turned to face his companion. I already hit send. Why are you so against us coming? He took his phone out of his pocket after feeling a powerful vibration. Doe eyes, provided the text. Katsuki, I'm at the aquarium, where are you? Did I get the time wrong? He slapped his palm to his face as his eyes grew wide. Fuck, he snapped back. I'll see you there, so just wait for me. He scowled at Kirishima, saying, running late, got caught up with some BS. He left Kirishima behind and ran off, saying, fine, whatever, if you want to come then hurry up because I'm not waiting for you. Change POV. Nanami read his message with a slight smile. She retrieved her backpack and took a seat on a bench close by. Nanami took out her compact mirror and attempted to straighten her bangs for the 10th time, maybe. When she took off her cherry-flavored lip gloss once more, she licked her lips and gave herself a mental reprimand. With a sigh, she reapplied it carefully. She whispered, I hope I don't look weird. Someone sat down next to her and placed an arm on the bench behind her head as if they had heard her concerns. Nanami tensed and glanced to the side, then relaxed upon seeing Kaminari. Look at you, all decked out and adorable, she said. He was grinning broadly, as he usually does. I've never seen you in casual clothes, Yoshino-chan. Do you always dress this cutely? She looked down at her lap uneasily and flushed. No, not really. What are you doing here? Oh, Kirishima texted everyone to meet at the aquarium for a group hangout. I think Midoriya, Jiro and some others are coming too. I was already nearby, so I guess I'm early. He chuckled. Nanami rubbed the back of her neck and scowled. That's nice, I guess. I'm meeting someone, so I won't be joining you. Oh, that's too bad. Mind if I keep you company? He inquired. Cool. We really should hang out more. What kind of foods do you like? Nanami looked at her lap awkwardly and shrugged. She cleared her throat and said, I'm not picky or anything. Ramen is my favorite food. Kaminari-kun, could you maybe move your arm? I'm not very comfortable. With a start, Kaminari jerked his arm away. He quickly apologized, saying, sorry about that. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. He scratched the back of his head and looked at her again. By chance are you seeing someone? Kaminari-kun, Nanami-chan. Ashido's excited voice made them both jump, and Kyoka and Izuku followed. Ah, you're wearing the outfit I picked. The Pinkett exclaimed as she hurried to extricate Nanami. I love how you did your hair, too. Nanami looked shamefully at her shoes and flushed. I'm glad to see you guys be but she said, fumbling with her skirt's hem while averting her gaze. Katsuki and I Oh, Hiroshima-kun said that Kachan is with him. This was a really great idea. We should have fun before our internship's right. Izuku responded with enthusiasm. I've always liked the aquarium. Ashido exclaimed, right, me too, I like the octopus. When Nanami remained silent, Kyoka arched an eyebrow. Thinking that the short girl was being overstimulated by Ashido's excitement, she smiled a little. In an attempt to calm her agitated friend, she pulled on her shirt and gave her a gentle prod. With a slight sigh, Nanami attempted to pull on her fringe but realized that her hairstyle would not allow it. Katsuki's voice made Izuku wince. What the hell? Of all the people you could have invited, you chose Deku. Nanami woke up and looked at her boyfriend through her bangs. She was focused on the way his hand twitched, even though it was obvious that he was frustrated. He seemed to be holding back. Hiroshima teased, whoa, Bakugo doesn't Yoshino-chan look cute? As their gazes locked, Nanami noticed Katsuki's posture loosen up. She briefly questioned whether she had caught a glimpse of his smile as his lips quirked. With a sigh, he took hold of her wrist and strode past the group, paying their admission fee. He whispered, you look cute in that getup. She ducked his eyes as her cheeks turned a vivid pink. He hesitated, then gave a menacing smile. Don't worry, I'm not letting these extras fuck everything up. I could make this easy and just blow them up. He suggested. Nanami suppressed a laugh and snorted. No way, let's just let them have fun. We have a movie to go to afterward, that'll be fine won't it? He combed his hair with an agitated hand. You're too nice sometimes. Let's just tell them to fuck off. She gave a sheepish smile. She scowled and cocked her head, saying, they already paid their entrance fee. Let's just go in different ways. She questioned sharply, aren't you the one who invited everyone, anyway? He sneered, yeah, because I invited Deku. Nanami suppressed the urge to laugh and smiled slightly. I wish you guys would get along. With a shrug, Katsuki turned back to the group. As he prepared to project his voice, he took a deep breath. I don't see that happening. Hey, extras, we're going this way. Do what you want but don't even think about bothering us. He smirked as he snatched Nanami's hand and fled from the extras after hearing her protest. Kyoka glanced at Ashido and arched an eyebrow. You don't think they're on a date, do you? She inquired. Ashido hummed while placing a hand on her chin. I can't say for sure. Nanami did say they weren't dating but a lot can change in one day. Kaminari followed the two by a few steps. He smiled slightly and said, there's really only one way to find out. Bakugo did say he likes her. Maybe he asked her out yesterday. Izuku shook his head wildly. Guys, if you really think they're on a date shouldn't we leave? He persisted. Over his shoulder, Hiroshima flung his arm. I dunno, Midoriya, aren't you worried? Yoshino-chan is so sweet and timid, and I don't think Bakugo is really her type. After all, didn't she like you? Bakugo is a pretty far leap. He placed his hand on his chin. He hummed, but they'd make a cute couple. With excitement, Ashido clapped her hands. Ooh, wait, what if she just lost a bet? You know, those two are always betting something. Hiroshima mumbled, that is, so possible that it's sad. Izuku said, can't we just ask them? Kaminari chuckled and said, I mean we could, but where's the fun in that? Before being pulled away in the same direction as the couple, Izuku hummed in worry. The jellyfish floating in the tank in front of them captivated Nana's attention. She was examining a white jellyfish that resembled frills and lace, but there were other varieties as well. Katsuki rushed to the opposite side of the room and exclaimed, they're so pretty. That one looks like it's wearing a wedding dress. With a hint of amusement. This flower-hat jellyfish is pretty too. Yoshino-chan is so cute, isn't she? The sound of Kaminari's voice in his ear caused Katsuki to frown. Glaring at the group hanging nearby, he turned around. What did I say to you extras about bothering us? He barked. He stopped and flashed a mischievous smile. What's the big deal? We're all friends here, he said, unless you and Yoshino-chan are more than friends. Katsuki's face flushed. He scoffed and turned away. He sneered, mind your own business, and turned to face Nana. She looked up at him and cocked her head, saying, those extras are being weirder than normal. He clarified, the idiot asked if we're more than friends. She looked at the jellyfish and tucked a flyaway hair behind her ear. And what did you say? Quote. You got embarrassed and walked over here instead of answering, right? She assumed. He turned to pinch her nose as his face flushed. Nana pushed his hand and laughed. I wasn't embarrassed. His heart began to beat more quickly as she grinned up at him. He moaned and took hold of her wrist. Her eyes brightened, and she opened her mouth to say, let's get something to eat. No, you aren't paying. She exclaimed, oh come on. Just for a snack. With a faint chuckle, he pulled her away from the jellyfish section. Kaminari knocked on the shoulders of his companions. Hey, guys, we lost them. The freckled boy turned his head away from the spotted jellyfish to give him a startled look. He smiled and gestured to the jellyfish, saying, what? Oh it's not really a big deal, right? Why don't we enjoy the jellyfish, guys? The spotted one is kinda cute. With a sigh, Kyoka wrapped her earphone jack around her finger and said, I mean it is, but, she cocked her head and asked, I want to know if it's a date or not. She half joked, just to know if Nanami is here of her own free will. Deku rubbed the back of his neck and scowled. He took out his phone and called his friend, saying, okay. I'll find out. Wait, what are you doing? He switched the phone to speaker mode. Hello, Izukun. Deku grinned. Hey, Nanami. This has been bothering me for the last half hour or so we've been here, he said slowly. Are you and Kachan on a date? We're not intruding, are we? Yes, you are intruding, Deku, goddammit. What we're doing is none of your damn business. I'm not sharing Nana with you and your nerd friends today, so kindly fuck off. Katsuki, wait. Click. Deku's smile faltered as he gazed at his phone. He looked to his companions. That wasn't a definitive answer, but I think it's better for all of us if we just go. He was chuckling nervously. Let's leave them alone. Nanami seems to be enjoying Kachan's company, so I think everything will be alright. Ashido pouted and pursed her lips. I guess. Change POV. As Nanami accepted Katsuki's phone, she chuckled a little. Katsuki, calm down. I'm sure they got the message. The fiery blonde complained. That doesn't make me any less pissed at them, you know. The sensation of Nanami connecting her pinky with his made him tense. With a sigh, he tried to calm himself. He unlinked their pinkies and took her hand instead, guiding her to a taiyaki stand, saying, let's go. We're gonna forget those guys and enjoy our date. Grinning, she considered her options. Nanami was eager for her date to resume, so she selected a pink taiyaki with a sakura flavor. Curious, she watched as Katsuki placed an order for a flavor she had never heard of. She looked at the big bite he took and was taken aback by the red filling after he paid and they started to leave the aquarium. He gave her a quick look and arched an eyebrow. Having been caught staring, she flushed. Pointing to it, she cleared her throat. What flavor is that? With a smirk on his face, he examined it and extended it to her. Spicy curry. Wanna try it? He asked, certain she wouldn't because she didn't have the same tolerance for heat as he did. Nanami gave it a tense look. She leaned down and sniffed it before flinching away. Since when is taiyaki filled with spicy curry? She asked. His smile only got bigger as he offered it to her once more. Whoa, that's really vapory, he said. When she saw him take out his phone and point it at her, she squinted. Nanami bit into her boyfriend's less than appetizing treat, resolute. Her eyes started to water right away, and she cried out in a low voice. Furiously digging into her pink taiyaki to quench her burning taste buds, Katsuki burst out laughing. Feeling it run, she reached into her backpack for some tissues and held them to her nose. She coughed. It's not that funny. He licked the filling off his finger and wiped some of it off her cheek while continuing to laugh. Take that as a lesson. He bit his spicy treat with ease. With a somewhat mocking wave of his taiyaki, he said, don't do something you won't like just to please others. You'll get burned. After cooling down with a few more bites of her sweet treat, Nanami sighed. As she cleaned her face with a few wet wipes, she looked at his phone and said, "Lesson learned." "Did you record that?" "I might have," she complained, "you're such a troll." As she reapplied her lip gloss for the umpteenth time that day, she attempted to sound angry, but the corners of her lips couldn't resist turning up into a smile. "No way, that's not Yoshino, is it?" "I think it is." The voices were painfully familiar, and Nanami stiffened. She took hold of Katsuki's hand and attempted to pull him away from the voices. Sadly, he remained unmoving, and she was aware that she couldn't outmuscle him. She scowled a little as she turned to see two boys their own age hovering a few paces behind them. One called and said, "Look at that, she looks kinda cute today." As Katsuki's eyebrow twitched, they came closer, smiling wryly. "Friends of yours?" he inquired queerly. When Nanami didn't respond, he scowled. A boy gazed up at him curiously. "Hey, I recognize you, you went to our middle school, didn't you? Then you went to win the sports festival at UA." Katsuki looked down at the two strangers with a frown as he raised his chin. "We're busy. Fuck off." The obvious rejection caused the boys to frown. Looking between the couple, the slightly taller of the two smiled and said, "What's your problem?" "We're just chatting." He tilted his head in curiosity and said, "Oh, I get it. You two are on a date, aren't you?" "Why though? You know about her quirk, right?" Squeezing his hand, Nanami attempted to gently pull him away once more. Once more, he did not move. The shorter intruder struck his palm with a fist. He laughed a little too loudly, and his friend quickly joined in. "Is she blackmailing you? What's a cool guy like you doing with a bad luck charm like her? You realize if you get close to her you'll get hurt, right?" he asked. "It's either that or she's just a really good lay." Katsuki's gaze grew strained. He growled, "The fuck did you just say?" He took a few steps forward, squared up to the two, and let go of Nanami's hand. The boys retreated a step. Hey man, relax, it was just a joke." Threateningly, Katsuki's left hand popped. "Then it wasn't funny. You assholes better apologize before I kill you." After a moment of hesitation, the taller of the two gave him a firm glare. "Hey, you aren't allowed to use your quirk in public." His glare changed to a menacing smile as he said, "And you fuckers aren't allowed to talk shit about my girlfriend." He said, "Yet here we are, a bunch of rule breakers." His hands kept popping, the explosions getting a little louder. "You better apologize if you don't want me to blow you to bits." Nanami hissed, "That's enough, Katsuki." She gestured to the small group of people who had gathered around them while pulling on the sleeve of his jacket. Many were getting ready for a brawl with their phones out. "You're a student in the hero course of UA, you shouldn't get into fights with jerks like them, you'll get in trouble." She looked at the two young men. "We're both students in the hero course at UA." She issued a warning. When she walked up to them, they recoiled, and she watched with satisfaction. She glared up at them, her eyes narrowing. Her voice lowered so that only the four of them could hear over the commotion. "Why don't you kindly screw off before I kick your asses myself?" In response to the disapproving glances they were receiving, the boys turned to face the crowd. They scowled and hurried off. Satisfied, Katsuki took hold of her hand and pushed through the throng of people. There were sounds of disappointment at the absence of a fight, as well as murmurs of approval at the way they handled it. When they arrived at the aquarium's exit, he maintained a straight face. Nanami scowled, wondering if denying him the opportunity to take care of the two jerks himself had angered him. "Katsuki, I'm..." With a slightly excited grin, he turned to face her, his cheeks flushed pink. He remarked, "That was hot." Unsure of how to react, she stammered, "You never stand up for yourself like that, it was fucking awesome." She was embarrassed and confused, and her eyes were wide. You she looked down, using her hand to cover her blush. "I just didn't want them to ruin our date." He smiled and started pulling her along. He looked at his watch and then back at her, saying, "Honestly, after that, nothing you do could ruin this. Our movie doesn't start for another hour. Do you want to get something to eat?" With a shy twiddling of the end of a stray curl, Nanami shook her head. The spiky-haired boy's ears turning red made her smile, and she said, "Katsuki, I like you so much." What the hell, why that all of a sudden?" Grinning, she hurried to walk with him. "I wanted you to be embarrassed with me." In the middle of the crowded sidewalk, Katsuki came to a stop. Like water around a big rock, other pedestrians instinctively avoid them. Her cheeks were flushed when he turned to face her again. She didn't recognize the expression he was wearing. His brows were relaxed and his eyes, which were usually permanently frowning, were soft. His mouth was in a hard line, and his blush had extended to his ears. Not a frown, not a smile. Nanami tried to ingrain the picture in her memory. The expression vanished as fast as it had come. Once more, he led her through the crowds until they arrived at the park, where they shared many unforgettable moments. She had to switch to a light jog to keep up with his rapid pace, which caused her braids to undo themselves and her hair tie to fall out. Quizzically, she glanced around, wondering why they were here. He looked back at her after locating a more private spot in the park and saw how his hurry had ruined the adorable hairstyle she had undoubtedly worked so hard to create. "Shoot," she whispered while searching her backpack. "All these supplies in my bag and I didn't think to bring an extra scrunchie," she was grumbling. "Geez," she felt a slight tap on her cheek and looked up to see a blue gift bag that was slightly crumpled. Huh. His blush had started to subside, so he avoided making eye contact and muttered, "I said I'd get you something, didn't I? You believe you can utilize that?" "A hair stick." She pursed her lips, grabbed the bag, and looked inside. "Katsuki, it's really lovely." With a slight smile, Nanami placed the bag in her backpack and carefully twisted her fringe behind her in a small bun, putting the hair stick in the middle to secure it, putting her hair in a half-down, half-up style. She looked up her date and grinned broadly. Nanami held up the item and looked at it for a few seconds, simply admiring the design. "Katsuki, I adore it. Do I look okay wearing it?" Her cheeks were flushed as she attempted to keep her unbridled happiness within a reasonable range as she asked. As he took a step forward and placed a hand on her cheek, Katsuki's eyes widened slightly at how well it fit the freckled girl. Nanami's breath caught as he stopped a short distance away, their noses brushing. Her eyes were closed, and that seemed to be all the permission he needed before he covered her lips with his own. As they strolled together, Nanami rubbed her eyes and said, "I can't believe you fell asleep during a scary movie." He laughed. She looked up at him and yawned. "We've fought against real villains, fake ones aren't that scary by comparison." She looked down, her face displaying her embarrassment. "It was still rude of me to sleep on our date," she said. "I apologize for that." Smiling, content that something he had chosen had brought her such joy, Katsuki shrugged and looked at her hairpin as the pearls moved with her steps. He frowned at the graying clouds in the sky and looked at her, and to his surprise, she had brought out an umbrella and spread it over their heads as the rain poured down. She smiled at him with a slightly arrogant expression, saying, "Rain and I tend to go hand in hand." "Let's get you home," he said, grinning and taking the umbrella from her to protect them both from the rain. She nodded in agreement and followed him as he said, "There isn't much else we can do today now that it's raining." She put her hands on her cheeks and said, "I had my first kiss with Katsuki." Her smile grew as she closed her eyes and covered her face to conceal the most likely silly expression on her face. "I'm sharing an umbrella with my boyfriend," she found herself giggling a little. He licked his lips and his thoughts drifted back to their kiss, and he found it rather amusing to watch Nanami giggling and making a number of random expressions, probably replaying their date in her mind. He had wished it had gone more smoothly, but in all honesty, he was just relieved that nothing bad had happened. "Nana, by the way, are you wearing flavored lip balm or something?" she asked, glancing up at him. It was adorable when her face flushed and she put her hands to her lips. "Oh, I'm sorry, did you find that offensive?" With hesitation, she asked. "I liked it," he said, shaking his head. "Damn, I don't think I've been this calm in a while," he shrugged, his eyes brightening with insight. "I was just wondering." She held her hands behind her back and hummed, "Oh yeah, you're not particularly murdery today. You know, I don't mind when you're angry. Therefore, just because we're going on a date doesn't mean you should try to change." He grunted in response, and she prodded his side. "Well, I don't really like when you get violent with people so quickly, but that's just you being you," she said, tilting her head to the side. He scoffed and put his hand on her hair, being careful not to mess it up, saying, "And your grandmother, if she messes with you again, I'm going to explode the shit out of her. I wouldn't have to get violent if the people surrounding us weren't such fucking idiots." "Oh, that's okay. I will never see her again. Everything is really okay now, all thanks to you, Katsuki." She smiled at him, clearly giddy, because Mom filed a restraining order against her, so she can't come to see us anymore. "You truly are my hero." Without a word, Katsuki simply wrapped his arm around her and drew her toward him, and they walked in cozy silence, slowly making their way to her house, Nanami feeling her heart pounding in her chest like a drum as he led her to the gate. "Did you enjoy yourself?" As she opened the gate to let him in, he paused and asked, "I'll make sure the extras don't bug us next time." She nodded, and he sighed with what she thought was relief. He smirked as he looked at the hair stick and said, "Damn, that looks good on you." He placed his hand on her head and tangled his fingers in her hair, then leaned down and grinned slightly. His lips were on hers. He parted from the sound of the door opening and a camera flashing, and Nanami leaned up onto her toes, holding on to his jacket lightly as she exhaled through her nose. The kiss was gentle, and although Nanami found his lips to be somewhat dry, she didn't find it unpleasant. The first date for Nanami. This will be included in the album. Sakura gave a happy squeal. Hajime hurried out of the house, saying, "You have a boyfriend, Nanami. How come you didn't tell me?" he asked frantically. He ran to his daughter and pulled her from Katsuki, hugging her and effectively getting her drenched from the rain. "No, you're too young. You have to be 18 to start dating." Quote. "Hajime, she's 15, go away," Sakura said, shaking her head and putting her hand to her mouth to project her voice. "Ignore him, Nanami. Your father and I began dating when we were 13 and 14 years old," she said with a small laugh. Quote. "Dad, it's raining," Nanami moaned, her cheeks flushed as her father scowled at her boyfriend. Sakura rolled her eyes and rolled back inside, shutting the door behind him as Hajime whimpered and let his daughter go, returning to the house and not so discreetly observing them through the blinds. "Good night, Katsuki," said Nanami, letting out a sigh and bowing to him. "I would give you a hug, but I'm completely soaked because of my dad." She rose on her toes and gave him a cheek kiss before running back to her house. Keep the umbrella. Even though his girlfriend's father didn't seem to approve of him, Katsuki was thrilled with the way his day had gone and rubbed the back of his neck when he saw Hajime glaring at him before heading home.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.